Hey guys, tonight we're taking a deep dive, literally, into one of the most audacious, mind-bogglingly difficult engineering feats of the 19th century. You're curled up, perhaps with a warm drink, the faint glow of your screen casting a soft light, as we prepare to journey back to a time when connecting continents wasn't just hard, it felt utterly, laughably impossible. You'll stand on the deck of a ship, feeling the roll of the Atlantic, watching an impossible dream unfold, knowing full well that you probably won't survive this particular historical adventure with your sanity completely intact, let alone your life. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling chatty, drop a comment below with your location and local time. It's always wild to see how many time zones we cover together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine, if you will, the mid-19th century. The world, as vast and sprawling as it felt, was still largely disconnected. News, ideas, political decrees, the ebb and flow of commerce, all moved at the speed of a sailing ship, or at best, a steam packet. If you lived in London and needed to communicate with someone in New York, you basically wrote it on a piece of paper, tied it to a very patient seagull, and hoped for the best. Or, more realistically, you entrusted your precious missive to a vessel that would embark on a journey of weeks, battling storms, calms, and the sheer, relentless emptiness of the North Atlantic. A message sent might arrive a month later, by which time the news it carried could be utterly irrelevant, the crisis it addressed long since past, or the opportunity it highlighted irrevocably lost. It was a world of profound, frustrating delays, where distance truly meant isolation. But then, something revolutionary began to hum across the land. The electric telegraph, a marvel of human ingenuity, was rapidly shrinking continents. You'd seen it in action, dots and dashes, zipping almost instantaneously across wires strung between poles, carrying messages faster than any horse, train, or even whispered rumor. This was the future, a network of nerves beginning to bind nations together. The first successful commercial telegraph line in the United States, famously demonstrated by Samuel Morse in 1844, connected Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, proving that electricity could indeed carry thought over vast distances. It was a game-changer, allowing information to travel at the speed of light, but only as far as the wires could stretch across solid ground. And that, my friends, was the rub. The Atlantic Ocean, a truly formidable expanse of water, remained the ultimate barrier. It was a liquid chasm, 2,000 miles wide at its narrowest point, separating the old world from the new, culture from commerce, families from their kin. To bridge this gap, to extend the electric pulse across that watery void, seemed like the wildest, most fantastical dream imaginable. Suggesting you'd string a wire across the Atlantic was probably met with the same enthusiasm as proposing we build a highway to the moon. People would nod politely, then subtly check if you'd recently hit your head. It was an idea so audacious, so far beyond the technological capabilities of the era, that it bordered on lunacy. Yet there were those, a special breed of visionaries, financiers, and engineers, who looked at that vast, churning expanse of ocean and didn't see an insurmountable barrier, but an irresistible challenge. They saw not just the technical impossibility, but the profound human need for connection. Imagine the power, news from Europe reaching America in minutes, not weeks. Stock prices, political developments, scientific discoveries, even personal greetings, all flowing back and forth across the globe as if separated by mere inches. The potential for trade, for diplomacy, for simply understanding each other across cultures, was staggering. It was a dream that promised to fundamentally reshape human civilization, to compress the world into a more manageable, more connected sphere. These were the kind of people who, when faced with a problem, didn't just walk away. They started drawing diagrams on napkins, probably at 3 a.m, fueled by too much coffee and an unshakable belief in the impossible. They looked at the success of shorter underwater cables, like the one successfully laid across the English Channel in 1851, connecting Dover to Calais, a mere 25 miles, and thought, well, if we can do 25, Why not 2,000? It was a logical leap that ignored about 99% of the actual difficulties. But hey, that's how big dreams start, right? You ignore the scary bits until you're too far in to turn back. The sheer scale of the dream was what captivated them. This wasn't just about making money, though fortunes certainly stood to be made. It was about achieving something truly monumental, something that would be remembered for centuries. It was about taming the wild, unpredictable ocean with a delicate thread of copper and gutta percha, an insulating material derived from a tree's sap, which was itself a relatively new discovery being used for this very purpose. The idea of this seemingly fragile line withstanding the immense pressures of the deep, the abrasive currents, the biting cold, and the potential for damage from ships or marine life, was frankly terrifying. It was like trying to thread a needle the size of a continent, with the needle eye being a tiny harbor in Newfoundland, and the thread being a mile-long spaghetti noodle you had to keep from snapping in 1,000 different places. The proponents of this impossible dream weren't just engineers, they were evangelists. They had to convince investors, governments, and the public that this wasn't just a pipe dream, but a viable, if incredibly ambitious, undertaking. They spoke of a future where continents conversed, where distance was annihilated, where the pulse of global events beat as one. It was a seductive vision, full of promise and the faint scent of untold riches. Yet beneath the grand pronouncements and the optimistic projections lay a mountain of unknown challenges. No one had ever attempted anything on this scale before. The ocean floor was largely uncharted, its depths unknown. The technology for laying such a vast length of cable was embryonic, the ships required barely conceived. Historians still argue whether the initial proponents of a transatlantic cable were driven more by the pursuit of immense commercial profit or a genuine, almost utopian, vision of global unity and instantaneous knowledge sharing. Perhaps it was a bit of both, a potent cocktail of ambition, greed, and a touch of madness. What is certain is that the dream, once conceived, became a relentless obsession for a few determined individuals. It was a whisper that turned into a roar, a quiet conviction that ignited an entire industry. They knew it would be difficult, but they couldn't possibly have known how difficult. They were standing at the precipice of an audacious dream, about to embark on a journey that would push human endurance, ingenuity, and sheer stubbornness to their absolute limits. They imagined a single thread, uniting two worlds, and they were about to discover just how lonely and brutal the job of laying it would be. You stand at the precipice, yes, but how, exactly, do you get to the precipice? You can dream all you want about connecting continents with a whisper of electricity, but dreams, as lovely as they are, don't lay cables across the Atlantic. For that, you need something a little more tangible. You need visionaries, yes, but also engineers, financiers, and a whole lot of very brave, or perhaps very foolish, people willing to stare down the unknown. And that's precisely what begins to emerge from the swirling mists of possibility, a collection of minds, some brilliant, some merely stubborn, all united by an audacious, almost ludicrous ambition. Imagine the hushed conversations in dimly lit parlors, the diagrams sketched on napkins, the grand pronouncements made over clinking teacups, or perhaps something stronger. This wasn't just about making a phone call, mind you. It was about shrinking the world, making the unimaginable instantly accessible. You feel the palpable excitement, the buzzing energy of an idea taking root, spreading like wildfire through the scientific and financial elite. At the heart of this burgeoning dream stands a man you simply must meet, Cyrus Westfield. He wasn't a scientist, not really. He was a paper merchant, a man of business, sharp as a tack and with an almost supernatural tenacity. You see him now, a man with an intensity in his gaze that could probably melt glaciers, or at least convince a room full of skeptical investors to part with their fortunes. He'd already made a tidy sum in paper, and then in railways, but this was different. This was legacy. This was the kind of project that makes you forever etched into the history books, or, just very, very bankrupt. He'd initially been drawn into a scheme to lay a telegraph cable from Newfoundland to the mainland of North America. A mere hop, skip, and a jump, right? But then, the vision expanded, as grand visions often do, like a balloon inflating with pure, unadulterated hubris. Why stop at Newfoundland when Ireland was just on the other side? The idea, of course, was met with a healthy dose of eye rolls and scoffing. A wire across the ocean? Are you mad, sir? You can almost hear the collective tooting. But Field, bless his persistent heart, wasn't easily deterred. He gathered around him a consortium of equally bold, or perhaps equally unhinged, individuals. There was John Brett, a telegraph engineer with a flair for the dramatic, and his brother Jacob, who handled the financial side. You feel the weight of their combined ambition, a force strong enough to bend reality, or at least bend the rules of common sense. But ambition alone won't get a cable laid. You need science. And here's where a crucial piece of the puzzle falls into place, a mainstream historical fact that changed everything. Matthew Fontaine Maury, an American naval officer and oceanographer, had been meticulously mapping the Atlantic seabed. His soundings, taken from various naval vessels, revealed something extraordinary, a relatively flat, shallowish plateau stretching between Newfoundland and Ireland. He dubbed it the Telegraph Plateau. You can almost hear the collective gasp of relief. No abyssal trenches of unfathomable depth, no jagged peaks waiting to shred a delicate cable. It was, for all intents and purposes, a relatively smooth, welcoming pathway. Suddenly, the impossible seemed merely, incredibly difficult. With the route seemingly viable, the next challenge loomed. What, exactly, do you make this magical thread out of? The engineering challenges were immense, bordering on the fantastical for the time. You weren't just sending a signal across a few miles. You were asking it to travel thousands through cold, crushing depths, resisting salt water, curious sea creatures, and the sheer, relentless pull of gravity. It was like trying to string a piece of wet spaghetti across the Grand Canyon, except the spaghetti had to carry electricity, and the Grand Canyon was miles deep and full of sharks. Okay, maybe not sharks, but definitely some weird, squiggly things that would make you say, "Nope, not going in there." The core problem was insulation. Copper, excellent for conducting electricity, is utterly useless when submerged in salt water. It just leaks. The signal would dissipate into the vastness of the ocean like a forgotten whisper. This is where a quirky, almost accidental, tidbit comes in. The solution arrived in the form of a rather unassuming tree sap from Southeast Asia, gutta percha. You might never have heard of it, but in the mid-19th century, gutta percha was the wonder material. It was discovered to be an excellent insulator, pliable when heated, and incredibly durable when cool. Imagine a material that could be molded like clay, then become as tough as a boot, and repel water like a duck's back. It was nature's original superinsulator, long before Silicon Valley thought it invented everything. So, the plan began to crystallize, a core of multiple copper wires for conductivity, surrounded by layers of gutta percha for insulation, then cushioned by tarred hemp, and finally, armored with outer strands of iron wire for strength. It sounds simple, doesn't it? Just a big, long, insulated rope. But designing something that could withstand its own immense weight in miles of water, resist corrosion, and still transmit a faint electrical pulse across an ocean, that was a feat of materials science and engineering that still makes you shake your head in wonder. They were essentially creating a bespoke, deep-sea umbilical cord, a lifeline for a global brain that hadn't even been born yet. You feel the palpable tension as the initial designs are presented. The sheer scale of it. Miles upon miles of this concoction, each inch critical. How do you even make that much? And once made, how do you spool it onto a ship? And then, how do you lay it? The ocean floor was mapped, yes, but the dynamics of laying a heavy, fragile cable at a consistent speed, at a consistent tension, in unpredictable weather, were utterly unknown. There were no precedents. No instruction manuals. It was a grand experiment on a scale that dwarfed almost anything attempted by humanity before. The financial challenge was equally daunting. Cyrus Field, with his relentless drive, began forming companies and drumming up investment. You witnessed the frantic meetings, the eloquent speeches, the sheer force of personality required to convince people to pour vast sums of money into what many still considered a pipe dream. The Atlantic Telegraph Company was formed in 1856, a testament to the belief, or perhaps the speculative greed, that this truly was possible. They were asking for millions of pounds, a staggering sum for the era. It was the equivalent of asking for billions today for a project that had a 99% chance of failure. "Oh, just a few £1,000,000, what's the worst that could happen?" You can almost hear them quip, perhaps with a nervous twitch in their eye. You sense the collective breath being held. The plans were ambitious, bordering on reckless. The engineering challenges were understood in theory, but entirely untested in practice. The very idea of the cable's longevity, its ability to transmit a clear signal over such a distance, was a leap of faith. Historians still argue whether the initial surveys truly grasped the full complexity of the ocean floor, or if they were merely sufficient to inspire investment and get the ball rolling. Was it pure scientific foresight, or a healthy dose of optimistic delusion? Probably a bit of both. But the dream, once ignited, was a powerful, irresistible flame. You feel the pull of it, the almost magnetic attraction to the idea of instant communication, of binding the old world to the new. It was a quest born of audacity, fueled by science, and propelled by an almost naive, yet utterly captivating, belief that if you could dream it, you could build it. And so, with plans drawn and challenges identified, though not yet truly understood, the stage was set for the monumental task ahead. The world held its breath, unaware of the heartbreaks, the triumphs, and the sheer, lonely struggle that lay just beyond the horizon. You stand there, a silent observer at the precipice of this audacious dream, but the initial thrill, that rush of possibility, has begun to curdle into a chilling dread. Because, dear listener, before a single coil of transatlantic cable ever touched the deck of a mighty ship, before the grand expeditions even cast off their mooring lines, the dream itself was already taking a beating. These weren't dramatic shipwrecks or snapped cables in the deep just yet. These were the quiet, insidious failures of understanding, the bitter lessons forged in the crucible of pure, unadulterated reality. You see the visionary engineers, their brows furrowed, their drawing boards littered with crumpled schematics, as they slowly, painfully, began to grasp the true, terrifying scale of what they were attempting. Imagine, if you will, the early days of the telegraph. It was a marvel, a miracle. Messages zipping across land, faster than a horse, faster than the wind. "Eureka!" cried the world. "Let's put it under the sea!" And for short distances, like across the English Channel, it worked, sort of. But then came the transatlantic whisper. "What about 2,000 miles?" And that's when the smiles started to falter, replaced by a sort of wide-eyed, existential terror. You feel the weight of that question, the sheer, mind-boggling impossibility of it. It's like trying to shout a secret from your bedroom window to someone standing on the moon. The sound, even if it could travel, would be so faint, so distorted, it might as well be a whisper from a ghost. This was the first, most crushing lesson, the tyranny of distance. On land, you could put repeaters, little booster stations, every few miles. But how do you put a repeater at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, a mile or two down, in pitch black, crushing pressure? You simply couldn't. The signal, they quickly realized, would weaken exponentially. It wasn't just a matter of making the wire longer. It was a fundamental law of physics laughing in their faces. You can almost hear the collective sigh of exasperation as the basic principles of electrical resistance and capacitance started to sink in, revealing a problem far more complex than just making a really long wire. It was like trying to power your entire house with a single AA battery, utterly futile. Then came the material problem, a truly vexing conundrum. What do you use to insulate a wire that's going to spend centuries submerged in corrosive salt water, under pressures that could crush a battleship? Early telegraph cables, even the short ones, relied heavily on a remarkable substance called gutta percha. You might not have heard of it, but imagine a kind of natural rubber, a milky sap harvested from trees primarily in Southeast Asia, particularly Malaysia and Indonesia. It was fantastic for insulation, flexible, waterproof, and a good electrical non-conductor. But it was also a pain to work with, prone to tiny imperfections, and its long-term durability under deep-sea conditions was a complete unknown. Historians still argue whether the early proponents fully grasped the unprecedented scale of the engineering challenges, or if they were driven more by an almost blind faith in progress. You can almost feel the exasperation of the engineers trying to ensure every single millimeter of that precious gutta-percha coating was flawless for thousands of miles. One microscopic pinhole, one tiny crack, and salt water would seep in, creating a short circuit, a fatal flaw that would silence the entire line. It was like trying to make a perfectly sealed, mile-long sausage casing out of a material that was constantly threatening to spring a leak. And speaking of the ocean itself, that vast, mysterious abyss was another colossal failure point in their early understanding. Before these grand schemes, humanity knew precious little about the deep sea. They imagined a relatively flat, muddy plain, a gentle trough between continents. Oh, how delightfully naive! Early soundings, rudimentary as they were, started to reveal a truth far more terrifying: underwater mountains, treacherous canyons, jagged rock formations, and unpredictable currents. You picture the early maps, dotted with hopeful lines, slowly being replaced by more accurate, but far more daunting, topographical nightmares. It was like planning a leisurely stroll across a park, only to discover the park was actually the Himalayas, submerged. The sheer difficulty of laying a delicate cable over such rugged, unseen terrain was a bitter pill to swallow. How do you prevent it from snagging, from stretching too thin over a peak, or from simply falling into an unreachable chasm? The answers were nowhere to be found. The manufacturing process itself presented a series of failures before it even began. How do you produce thousands of miles of cable, perfectly insulated, perfectly conductive, without a single flaw? The technology simply didn't exist at the scale required. Imagine trying to knit a scarf that stretches from New York to London, and it has to be absolutely perfect, with no drop stitches, no knots, no frayed ends. Any tiny imperfection, any weak spot in the copper conductors or the gutta-percha insulation, would doom the entire enterprise. The early attempts at producing even short lengths highlighted the immense quality control nightmare that lay ahead. It was a factory manager's worst nightmare, scaled up to an almost comical degree. You see the workers, their hands sore, their eyes strained, trying to maintain an impossible level of precision. Then there was the fundamental question of power. Even if you made a perfect cable, how do you send an electrical signal strong enough to traverse 2,000 miles? Early batteries were relatively weak. The concept of signal attenuation, where the electrical pulse weakens over distance, was a harsh tutor. It was like trying to have a conversation with someone on the other side of a football stadium without a megaphone. You could shout all you want, but by the time your words reached them, they'd be nothing more than a faint whisper, if audible at all. The very first tests, even on shorter experimental cables, showed how quickly the signal degraded. This wasn't just about making a connection, it was about making a clear, usable connection. The early failures here were conceptual, but they were no less devastating, forcing engineers to rethink everything from the cable's core design to the very nature of electrical transmission itself. It was the moment they realized they weren't just building a bridge. They were building a bridge that had to carry a whisper, flawlessly, for thousands of miles. The sheer logistics of handling such a massive object also presented a cascade of early failures in conceptualization. How do you store thousands of miles of cable on a ship? How do you pay it out smoothly, without kinks or breaks, as the ship pitches and rolls in the open ocean? The weight alone was staggering. Early calculations suggested even the largest ships might not be able to carry enough. You feel the knot in your stomach as engineers grappled with the physics of tension, drag, and the crushing forces of the deep. It was like trying to unwind a giant spool of thread while riding a roller coaster, nearly impossible without a system specifically designed for it. The methods for coiling and deploying such a colossal serpent of wire hadn't even been invented yet. These weren't just technical hurdles, they were psychological ones. The initial failures were lessons in humility. They stripped away the naive optimism and replaced it with a grim determination, born out of repeated, frustrating encounters with the unforgiving laws of nature. You can almost hear the exasperated sighs in the smoke-filled rooms where these visionaries debated, argued, and despaired. It was the realization that this wasn't just a big project. It was a project of unprecedented scale, fraught with unknowns at every turn. It was like trying to build a perfectly functional, self-sustaining city on Mars without ever having left Earth's atmosphere. The failures weren't always dramatic snaps and fizzles. Sometimes, they were just the cold, hard realization of an impossible equation, a design flaw in the very fabric of their initial assumptions. And it was these bitter, quiet lessons, learned in the drawing rooms and early test labs, that forced them to go back to the drawing board, not just to refine, but to fundamentally reinvent. You stand on the bustling docks, a cacophony of shouts, creaking wood, and the rhythmic clang of metal filling the air. The smell of tar, brine, and freshly sawn timber hangs heavy, mingling with the faint, metallic scent of industry. Before you, two colossal silhouettes dominate the skyline, dwarfing the surrounding buildings and the ant-like figures scurrying about their decks. These aren't just any ships. These are the chosen champions, the behemoths tasked with conquering the Atlantic, the HMS Agamemnon and the USS Niagara. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer audacity of it. After the initial, humbling failures, the dreamers and engineers came to a stark realization: you couldn't just spool a little wire onto any old steamer and hope for the best. No, this required vessels of unprecedented scale and strength, ships that could carry not just hundreds, but thousands of tons of delicate, heavy cable across the most treacherous ocean on Earth. It was like deciding to build a bridge across the Grand Canyon, then realizing you needed to invent a new kind of concrete and a crane the size of a mountain range just to get started. First, your gaze settles on the HMS Agamemnon, a proud flagship of the British Royal Navy. She's a screw battleship, a marvel of mid-19th century naval engineering. Her sleek black hull, though currently looking a bit less menacing without her full complement of guns, still speaks of power. You can almost feel the vibrations of her massive engines, even at rest. Originally, she was designed to carry 91 guns, a floating fortress meant to project imperial might across the globe. Now many of those gunports stand empty, gaping maw-like holes where cannons once bristled. Her decks, once cleared for battle, are now littered with coils of rope, heavy machinery parts, and the constant, purposeful movement of hundreds of workers. Next to her, equally impressive, lies the USS Niagara. She's an American frigate, a powerful sailing ship, though also equipped with auxiliary steam power for those windless days or when precision was paramount. Her lines are graceful, almost elegant, but don't let that fool you. She was built for speed and long-range cruising, a swift hunter of the seas. Like her British counterpart, the Niagara has undergone a radical transformation. Her impressive armament, once capable of delivering devastating broadsides, has been largely removed. It's a strange sight, these instruments of war, stripped of their primary purpose, now repurposed for an act of global connection, a silent, symbolic handshake across the very waters they were once built to dominate. The modifications these ships underwent were nothing short of monumental. Think of it like trying to convert a military tank into a family RV, but instead of adding a kitchenette, you're trying to fit a small, very heavy railway line inside it. The biggest challenge, by far, was creating the cavernous spaces needed to store the transatlantic cable. This wasn't just a few spools of wire, this was a single, continuous length of cable, nearly 2,500 miles long, weighing in at an astonishing 10 tons per mile. Do the math, and you're looking at a total weight of roughly 25,000 tons. Of course, the ships wouldn't carry the entire cable. The plan was for them to meet in the middle, each carrying half. But even half of that weight was an engineering headache of epic proportions. Deep within the hulls of both the Agamemnon and the Niagara, immense iron tanks were constructed. You can peer down into the dark, echoing depths of these holds, where the air is thick with the scent of damp metal and grease. These tanks, built specifically for the cable, were designed to keep the precious cargo submerged in water. Why water, you ask? Well, it helped to keep the cable cool, preventing the sensitive gutta-percha insulation from softening and deforming under the immense pressure of its own weight. It also provided a degree of buoyancy, reducing some of the strain on the ship's structure. Imagine trying to fit 3 enormous, cylindrical swimming pools inside a ship, then filling them with miles and miles of coiled wire. It's a feat that still makes modern naval architects scratch their heads. The process of loading the cable itself was a logistical ballet of Herculean effort. From the cable factory, the colossal spool of cable was slowly, painstakingly transferred onto barges, then brought alongside the ships. Then, the real work began. Gangs of men, their muscles straining, carefully guided the thick, heavy cable into the ship's holds. It wasn't just a matter of dumping it in. Each coil had to be laid with meticulous precision, layer upon layer, like a giant, metallic serpent coiling itself into a perfectly ordered nest. You see men stripped to the waist, glistening with sweat, their faces grimed with dust and tar, as they wrestle the cable into place. The air thrums with the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of the cable settling into its new home, a sound that would become the monotonous soundtrack of their lives for weeks on end. "Mind your back, lad!" a foreman barks, his voice hoarse from shouting commands. A segment of the cable, thicker than your arm, swings precariously overhead as it's lowered into the tank. A near miss. A collective sigh of relief ripples through the crew. One wrong move, one kink in the cable, and weeks of work could be undone. It was a constant dance between brute force and delicate finesse. You can practically hear the engineers muttering about tension coefficients and insulation integrity, while the laborers just focused on not getting crushed. Historians still argue whether the initial coiling methods, though incredibly labor-intensive, inadvertently introduced tiny stresses that contributed to later cable failures. It was a high-stakes game of Tetris, but with a piece count in the thousands of miles. Beyond the cable tanks, the ships were also being fitted with the intricate machinery necessary for the actual laying process. This wasn't just about dropping the cable over the side. Oh no. There were massive paying-out machines, equipped with complex braking systems to control the speed at which the cable unwound and entered the ocean. Imagine a giant, super-precise fishing reel, but instead of a tiny lure, it's paying out thousands of tons of precious copper and gutta percha. There were engines dedicated solely to this task, and massive sheaves and rollers positioned at the stern of each ship, designed to guide the cable smoothly into the unforgiving depths. The constant whirring and clanking as these machines were tested created a whole new industrial symphony on board. It almost felt like the ships themselves were holding their breath, preparing for the immense burden they were about to undertake. A quirky little tidbit you might notice, if you're paying close attention, is the sheer number of pigeons being brought on board. Yes, pigeons. In an era before reliable wireless communication, these feathered messengers were considered a vital backup. Should the telegraph fail, and let's be honest, everyone knew it was a distinct possibility, these birds would carry urgent messages back to shore. It seems almost quaint, doesn't it? The most advanced technology of the age, paired with a method of communication that dates back to ancient Rome. It's like equipping a modern space shuttle with a carrier pigeon for emergency updates. You might even chuckle thinking about the poor sailor whose job it was to feed them. The crews, a mix of seasoned naval officers and engineers, along with a host of laborers, were also being prepared. Many had never seen anything like this. Their usual duties involved cannon drills and sail handling. Now, they were being retrained as deep-sea cable wranglers. It was a steep learning curve, requiring a blend of naval discipline and an entirely new set of technical skills. The atmosphere was thick with a mixture of apprehension and excitement. They were about to embark on a journey into the unknown, a true leap of faith. The HMS Agamemnon and the USS Niagara, once symbols of military might, now stood transformed. Their guns were gone, replaced by the silent promise of connection. They were pregnant with purpose, their bellies swollen with the metallic serpent that would hopefully bridge continents. As you watch them, ready to slip their moorings, a profound sense of anticipation settles over you. They are not just ships, they are vessels of hope, poised at the edge of an unprecedented journey, carrying not just cable, but the very dreams of a connected world. The lonely job of laying the first transatlantic telegraph cable by ship is about to begin. You stand at the threshold of a cavernous industrial building, its brick facade stained with years of soot and ambition. The air here is thick, humid, and carries a strange, almost rubbery scent, mingled with the metallic tang of machinery and the faint, earthy smell of tar. This isn't just a factory, it's the birthplace of a dream, the crucible where the impossible thread that would eventually span an ocean is being painstakingly forged. You're about to witness the intricate, colossal process of crafting the transatlantic cable itself, a deep-sea lifeline that, for all its eventual bulk, must remain incredibly delicate. Imagine stepping inside. The noise is immediate and enveloping, a symphony of whirring gears, clanking metal, and a rhythmic thrum of massive engines. It's warm, almost uncomfortably so, especially near the various vats and furnaces. You see rows upon rows of workers, their faces smudged, their movements precise and repetitive, like a human-powered assembly line. This isn't a quick print job, you know. This is pure, unadulterated, Victorian-era manufacturing grit. The very first ingredient, the heart of this colossal serpent, begins as slender strands of copper. You watch as thick copper rods are fed into drawing machines, pulled and stretched through progressively smaller dies, until they emerge as fine, gleaming wires, thinner than your little finger. These individual strands are then twisted together, forming a central conductor of 7 copper wires. Think of it like a very, very long, very, very expensive piece of spaghetti, but instead of boiling it, you're about to encase it in something truly revolutionary for its time. Now for the insulation, the unsung hero of electrical transmission, gutta percha. You see large, dark, rubbery sheets of it, being warmed and kneaded. Gutta percha, a natural latex from trees found in Southeast Asia, was the miracle material of the mid-19th century. Before it, telegraph wires were insulated with less reliable materials like tarred rope or even glass. But gutta percha, with its incredible insulating properties and its ability to withstand submersion in water, was a game-changer. It's kind of like the early internet's Wi-Fi, but instead of being invisible, it was a weird, slightly sticky, brown substance. You can almost smell its unique, faintly phenolic aroma as it's heated. It was so critical, in fact, that the British government, wary of relying on a single source, even explored cultivating gutta percha trees in their own colonies. It's hard to imagine something so vital coming from what looks like a giant, slightly smelly chewing gum. The process of applying this gutta percha is fascinating. The copper conductor is fed through an extrusion machine, where molten gutta percha is pressed around it in layers, like a very precise, continuous sausage casing. It's applied in 3 distinct coatings, each one inspected for any tiny pinholes or imperfections that could cause a short circuit deep beneath the ocean. You can practically hear the engineers holding their breath with each foot of cable that emerges, knowing that one microscopic flaw could doom an entire multi-million-pound endeavor. It's a bit like trying to perfectly wrap a gift that's 2,000 miles long without any wrinkles. Good luck with that. But the gutta percha coated copper, while electrically sound, is still incredibly fragile. It needs protection, and lots of it. So, the next layer you observe being applied is a thick padding of tarred hemp. This material, derived from cannabis plants, though not the kind you might be thinking of for your bedtime wind down, thankfully, is robust and provides cushioning. It's soaked in a mixture of pitch and tar, giving it that distinct, heavy, industrial scent that permeates the factory air. This layer offers both buoyancy and protection against the crushing pressures of the deep sea, as well as against the sharp edges of the outer armor. Finally, the real muscle of the cable comes into play, the armor. You watch as a large, noisy machine, a marvel of Victorian engineering, spins and twists, wrapping 18 strands of galvanized iron wire around the tarred hemp layer. These iron wires, each individually coated with tar for corrosion resistance, are laid on in a spiral, much like the strands of a heavy rope. This outer sheath is what gives the cable its immense tensile strength, allowing it to withstand the incredible forces of being paid out into the ocean and resting on the seabed. It's designed to protect against abrasion from rocks, the gnawing teeth of deep-sea creatures, yes, they thought of that, and the sheer weight of the ocean above. The sound of these machines braiding the iron is deafening, a metallic roar that vibrates through the very floor beneath your feet. It's like watching a giant, mechanical spider weaving an incredibly tough, but still surprisingly vulnerable, web. The sheer scale of this operation is mind-boggling. You walk past colossal wooden spools, each holding miles of the finished cable, waiting to be transported. The factory floor stretches out seemingly endlessly, filled with the continuous motion of machinery and men. The total length of the first successful cable attempt in 1858 was about 2,500 nautical miles, weighing over a ton per mile. That's a lot of copper, gutta percha, hemp, and iron. Imagine the logistical nightmare of managing such quantities of raw materials, ensuring consistent quality across thousands of miles. It's enough to make your modern supply chain manager weep. Quality control was paramount, yet also incredibly difficult. Each section of the cable had to be tested for its electrical conductivity and insulation resistance. You see workers meticulously checking for any breaks in the gutta percha, any nicks in the copper, any weak spots in the iron armor. Every inch was scrutinized, because a single flaw, no matter how small, could render the entire monumental effort useless once it was at the bottom of the Atlantic. Historians still argue whether the testing methods of the time were truly rigorous enough to guarantee the cable's long-term integrity, especially given the unprecedented conditions it would face. They were doing their best with the technology they had, but the ocean, as they would soon discover, had no sympathy for their best. The atmosphere in the factory is one of intense focus, mixed with a palpable sense of historical significance. Everyone, from the engineers in their top hats to the laborers sweating over the machines, knows they are part of something monumental. They are literally building the future, 1 foot of cable at a time. The air hums not just with machinery, but with the quiet determination of men trying to achieve what many still considered an impossible feat. You can feel the weight of expectation in every clank and whir. This isn't just a product, it's a promise, a physical embodiment of a grand vision. And as you watch the finished cable being coiled onto massive drums, ready for its journey, you can't help but marvel at the ingenuity, the sheer human effort, and the almost reckless ambition that went into crafting this deep-sea lifeline. The air, thick with the tang of salt and the nervous energy of anticipation, crackles around you. You stand on the deck of the USS Niagara, a ship of war now repurposed for an unprecedented act of peace. Beside her, the HMS Agamemnon, a British counterpart, bobs gently in the swells. These aren't just vessels, they are the cradles of a dream, about to be lowered into the deep. It's August 1857, and the grand, almost ludicrous, plan is finally underway. You've seen the cable coiled, a monstrous, inert serpent in the ship's vast holds, and now it's time for it to shed its skin and stretch across the ocean floor. The initial leg of this aquatic marathon begins from Valentia Bay, on the rugged southwest coast of Ireland. The idea, ambitious in its simplicity, is for the Niagara to start paying out the cable, steaming westward, while the Agamemnon follows, ready to take over mid-ocean and complete the journey to Newfoundland. Imagine the scene, a flotilla of hope, slowly, painstakingly, inching its way towards the unknown. The cable, a mere half-inch thick, yet weighing over a ton per nautical mile, begins its descent. You watch as it's carefully fed from the hold, through a series of rollers and brakes on the stern, designed to control its speed and tension as it plunges into the abyss. It's like trying to lower a wet noodle from the top of the Empire State Building, except the noodle is miles long and weighs more than a small mountain, and the building is a constantly moving ship on a turbulent ocean. What could possibly go wrong? The first few hours are, well, they're surprisingly uneventful. Almost boring, in the way truly monumental tasks often are in their execution. The cable unwinds with a rhythmic hum, a low, mechanical sigh that quickly becomes the soundtrack to your existence. The engineers, their faces grim with concentration, monitor the tension gauges. The crew, a mix of seasoned sailors and bewildered landlubbers, move with an almost religious reverence around the precious line. Each foot of cable that slips beneath the waves feels like a victory, a tiny step closer to bridging the unbridgeable. You can almost taste the optimism in the air, a heady mix of salt spray and collective belief. This is it, you think. We're actually doing it. It's a feeling of pure, unadulterated triumph, a moment where the impossible seems not just possible, but inevitable. Then, just as you settle into the monotonous rhythm of the cable laying, a jolt. Not a physical one, but a collective intake of breath that ripples through the deck. The ship's speed, the cable's payout rate, everything feels off. The tension gauge, which had been a steady, reassuring needle, begins to twitch nervously. The men around the paying out machinery exchange worried glances. It's like watching a high-stakes game of Jenga, where every slight tremor threatens to bring the whole precarious tower crashing down. And indeed, a shriek of metal, a sudden, sickening lurch, and then, silence. The hum stops. The rhythmic thud of the cable disappearing into the ocean ceases. The cable has snagged. Or, more accurately, the paying out machinery has malfunctioned. The brake, designed to prevent the cable from running out too fast and snapping under its own weight, has seized. The sudden stop puts an immense, unbearable strain on the delicate copper and gutta percha line already submerged. You hear shouts, the frantic clatter of men rushing to the stern. It's a scene of organized chaos, but the underlying emotion is pure, unadulterated dread. You crane your neck, straining to see. For a heart-stopping moment, the cable holds, stretched taut like a violin string plucked by a giant hand. You can almost hear it groaning under the strain. And then, with a sound more felt than heard, a dull, resonant thrum that vibrates through the very deck beneath your feet, it parts. It just breaks. One moment, it's there, a slender, dark line disappearing into the blue-black depths. The next, it's gone, the severed end whipping back into the air with surprising violence before vanishing beneath the waves, a ghostly, unrecoverable thread. A collective groan rises from the crew, a sound of utter defeat. It's barely been a few hours, barely a few miles from shore, and already, the ocean has claimed its first tribute. The hopes that had soared so high just moments ago now plummet, faster than the severed cable itself. You feel it, that sudden, crushing weight of disappointment, the bitter taste of reality after the sweet dream. It turns out the problem wasn't just a simple jam. The braking system, critical for controlling the cable's descent into the deep, was proving to be a notoriously fickle beast. Imagine trying to gently lower 1,000 miles of spaghetti from a skyscraper, and the mechanism designed to control its speed keeps either jamming entirely or letting it free fall. Not ideal for a precision operation. This particular incident, occurring after only about 5 miles of cable had been successfully paid out, was a stark, immediate reminder of the monumental challenges ahead. It wasn't just about making a cable. It was about laying it perfectly, without a single hiccup, across thousands of miles of unpredictable ocean. The engineers on board, men like Charles Bright, who would later be knighted for his contributions, are visibly distraught. They pore over diagrams, their faces etched with fatigue and frustration. The problem, as they quickly diagnose, is that the machinery designed to control the payout isn't robust enough for the immense forces at play. The cable, as it descends, creates enormous drag, and the brakes, intended to manage this, are simply not up to the task. It's like trying to stop a freight train with a bicycle brake. A valiant effort, perhaps, but ultimately futile. This early failure underscores a mainstream historical fact that would plague the entire project: the sheer, unprecedented scale of deep-sea engineering. No one had ever attempted anything remotely like this before. Every single component, from the cable itself to the ships and the machinery on board, was being pushed to its absolute limits, often beyond what they were designed for. It was an era of learning by doing, and doing often meant failing spectacularly before figuring out what worked. Think of it as the beta test for global communication, only instead of a software patch, you needed to haul back miles of heavy cable from the bottom of the Atlantic. And by haul back, I mean give up on and try again later, maybe after a very long nap. The decision is made. The expedition must return to Valencia. The broken end of the cable, though a symbol of failure, is also a valuable piece of evidence. They need to understand exactly why it happened, to refine the machinery, to learn from this painful, expensive lesson. As the ships turn back, you look out at the vast, indifferent ocean. It swallowed their hopes whole, barely burping. It's almost as if the sea itself is mocking their puny human endeavors, a colossal shrug of the shoulders from Mother Nature saying, "You think you can just string a wire across me? Cute." There's a quirky tidbit from these early days that highlights the desperation and the lack of understanding about deep-sea conditions. Some engineers initially believed that the pressure at such immense depths would actually help the cable by compressing it and making it stronger. This, of course, proved to be entirely incorrect. The pressure was just another force to contend with, squeezing the gutta percha insulation and making any tiny flaw a potential point of failure. It's like believing that if you squeeze a balloon hard enough, it'll become a rock. Spoiler alert, it pops. The mood on the return journey is somber. The initial elation has evaporated, replaced by a grim determination. This isn't just a setback, it's a testament to the sheer, unyielding power of the ocean and the nascent state of deep-sea technology. The men, who had been buoyed by the prospect of making history, now faced the daunting reality of their task. They are not just battling the elements, they are battling the unknown, a frontier more alien than the moon. Historians still argue whether the initial failures of the 1857 attempt were primarily due to engineering design flaws in the cable itself, or more attributable to the untested and crude nature of the paying out machinery and operational procedures at such unprecedented depths. Was the cable too weak for the forces it would encounter, or was the equipment for deploying it simply not up to the task of handling such a massive, fragile load? It's a classic chicken or egg scenario, only the chicken is made of copper and the egg is thousands of miles of salt water. What is clear, however, is that every component, every process, needed a serious reevaluation. As you disembark back in Valencia Bay, the cheers that greeted your departure are conspicuously absent. The air is heavy with disappointment, but also with a quiet resolve. This wasn't the end, it was merely the first, incredibly painful, lesson. The dream of connecting continents, though bruised, was not broken. Not yet. You've witnessed the intricate dance of machinery and human ingenuity, transforming raw materials into that colossal, yet surprisingly delicate, deep-sea lifeline. You've seen the cable itself, a marvel of mid-19th century engineering, ready to bridge the ocean. But now, the true, back-breaking, mind-numbingly repetitive work begins. Imagine, if you will, the logistical nightmare that unfolds as thousands of miles of that heavy, tar-scented serpent need to be meticulously loaded into the holds of the HMS Agamemnon and the USS Niagara. This isn't just a matter of tossing it in, oh no. This is an art form, a test of endurance, and a full-body workout that would make even the most dedicated modern CrossFitter weep softly into their protein shake. You stand on the docks, the air thick with the smell of brine, coal smoke, and the peculiar, oily scent of the gutta percha insulation. The cable, arriving in gargantuan coils from the manufacturing plants, is slowly, painstakingly, lifted by cranes and guided into the waiting ships. But once it's inside the ship, that's where the real fun begins. These weren't just empty cargo holds. They were purpose-built, cylindrical tanks, designed to house the cable in a series of concentric rings. Think of it like a massive, multi-layered Jenga tower, except instead of blocks, it's a living, breathing, incredibly heavy anaconda. You descend into the cavernous, dimly lit belly of the ship, the air growing warmer, heavier, and permeated with the metallic tang of sweat and the earthy aroma of the cable itself. The scene before you is one of relentless, rhythmic toil. Dozens of men, stripped to their waists, glistening with perspiration, move in a slow, almost hypnotic dance around a central core. The cable, thick as a man's thigh, uncoils from above and feeds down into the tank. Your job, should you be so unfortunate, is to guide it. Not with machines, mind you, but with your bare hands, your shoulders, your entire body. You walk in a continuous circle, a human carousel, ensuring each turn of the cable lies perfectly flat against the previous one. It's a bit like trying to perfectly coil a garden hose that weighs a ton per foot, while also making sure it doesn't kink, snap, or suddenly decide to become a highly effective tripwire. One wrong move, one moment of inattention, and a loop could spring up, knocking a man off his feet or, worse, crushing a limb. It's a constant, low-level thrum of danger that vibrates through the very decks beneath your feet. The sheer volume is staggering. To house the approximately 2,500 nautical miles of cable needed for the first attempt, the ship's tanks were immense. The Agamemnon, for instance, had 3 such tanks, each capable of holding hundreds of tons of cable. Imagine coiling that much material, layer upon layer, for weeks on end. You quickly learn the subtle language of the cable, the way it groans as it settles, the slight give of its sheath, the particular resistance it offers as you wrestle it into position. There's no escaping the monotonous rhythm: step, pull, guide, step, pull, guide. Your muscles scream in protest, your back aches, and your hands develop calluses that would shame a seasoned lumberjack. This isn't just physical labor, it's a test of mental fortitude, an exercise in enduring soul-crushing repetition. A quirky little tidbit often overlooked is the constant need to keep the cable wet. Not only did it help with the coiling process, making the tar, jute, and gutta percha sheath more pliable, but it also helped maintain the integrity of the insulation. So, as you toil in the ship's hold, you're not just wrestling a dry, stiff rope, you're often working with a perpetually damp, slightly slimy, and undeniably pungent serpent. It adds another layer of discomfort to an already grueling task, ensuring that even your clothes feel perpetually clammy. And occasionally, a supervisor, perhaps feeling particularly uninspired, might shout down, "More water, lads! Keep it moist!" A command that probably didn't do much for morale. The process of coiling was so critical that specialized teams of tank men were employed. These weren't just any sailors. They were strong, resilient, and possessed a unique spatial awareness to ensure the cable was laid evenly, without crossovers or undue strain that could lead to kinks or damage later. Each layer had to be perfect, because any imperfection could translate into a weak point once the cable was under the immense pressure of the deep ocean. It was a bit like packing the world's largest, most expensive, and most fragile spring, knowing that if you messed up, the entire thing might spontaneously unravel at the worst possible moment. No pressure though, right? Just the fate of transatlantic communication resting on your ability to coil a really big wire. One of the mainstream historical facts that often gets lost in the grand narrative is just how many individual hands touched this cable before it even left the dock. From the men who spun the copper conductors, to those who applied the gutta percha, to the thousands who worked in the coiling sheds and then on board the ships, it was a truly collective effort of manual labor on an unprecedented scale. These were the unsung heroes of the cable, toiling in conditions that would be considered utterly unacceptable by today's health and safety standards. Imagine working in a perpetually dim, poorly ventilated space, the air thick with the smell of hot tar and stale sweat, with only the flickering glow of lanterns to guide your way. It was a far cry from the air-conditioned, ergonomically designed control rooms of modern logistics centers. Historians still argue whether the initial design of the cable tanks truly optimized for ease of coiling and safety, or if it was simply a best-guess solution for an unprecedented challenge. Was there a better way? Could they have automated more of it, even with the technology of the day? Or was this brute force, human-powered method simply the only practical approach given the immense weight and awkwardness of the cable? Whatever the answer, the men in those tanks weren't pausing for academic debates. They were just trying to get through the next shift, to coil the next 100 yards, to avoid having their toes crushed by a rogue loop of the serpent. And so, for weeks, the ships became a hive of ceaseless activity. The rhythmic thud of the cable settling, the grunts of the men, the occasional shout from a foreman, all blended into the background hum of the ship. You emerge from the holds at the end of your shift, blinking in the daylight, your body aching, your mind numb with repetition. But the cable is there, hundreds of miles of it, nestled snugly in its watery bed within the ship's belly. It's a testament to human endurance, a monument to the sheer, unglamorous effort required to turn an impossible dream into a tangible, if still incredibly fragile, reality. And as you finally climb into your bunk, the rocking of the ship a gentle lullaby, you can still feel the phantom weight of the cable in your arms. You are now truly on the ship, a silent observer in the vast, indifferent expanse of the Atlantic. The initial awe of the colossal vessels, HMS Agamemnon and USS Niagara, quickly gives way to the stark reality of life within their iron hulls. Feel the perpetual, rhythmic sway beneath your feet, a gentle, insistent rocking that never truly ceases, even in calm seas. It's a constant, subtle reminder that you are utterly adrift, surrounded by nothing but horizon and the deep, dark water. The air itself has a particular quality here. It's a damp, salty breath, carrying the faint tang of brine, the metallic scent of machinery, and the ever-present, cloying aroma of coal smoke from the engine rooms below. You can hear the ship breathe around you, the groan of the timbers, the creak of the rigging, and the ceaseless, hypnotic thrum of the great engines that propel you forward. Below deck, the rhythmic clank and whir of the cable-laying machinery becomes the ship's heartbeat, a mechanical pulse that dictates the pace of every waking moment. Up on deck, the only sound that rivals it is the relentless slap and hiss of waves against the hull, an eternal whisper that promises both passage and peril. Life on these ships, dedicated to the singular, monumental task of laying the first transatlantic cable, was a unique blend of extreme isolation, mind-numbing monotony, and sudden, heart-stopping terror. Imagine waking up each day to the same endless stretch of blue-gray ocean, watching the cable, thick as a man's arm, unspool into the depths, a dark serpent disappearing into the abyss. Day after day, week after week, the horizon remains stubbornly empty, save for the companion ship, a silent twin mirroring your own lonely journey. There's no land in sight, no passing vessels, no news from home. It's just you, the ship, the crew, and the cable. Their idea of streaming entertainment was probably watching a particularly interesting cloud formation, or maybe counting how many times the same seagull flew past for the 100th time. The crew's existence was defined by the cable. Every man, from the lowliest deckhand to the most seasoned engineer, was acutely aware of its preciousness and its fragility. Their shifts were long, often 12 hours or more, demanding constant vigilance and backbreaking physical labor. You watched them, their faces grimed with coal dust and salt spray, their muscles straining as they guide the massive cable through its intricate path from the holds, over the paying-out machinery, and into the sea. The cable itself was a living thing, heavy and unwieldy, constantly threatening to snag, to snap, or worse, to ensnare an unwary limb. Safety precautions were rudimentary at best, and the constant danger of injury, even death, was an unspoken companion to every task. A misplaced foot, a sudden lurch of the ship, a moment's inattention, and a man could be dragged overboard or crushed by the relentless machinery. The food, as you might expect, was not exactly gourmet. Mainstream historical fact: the standard diet on long sea voyages of this era consisted largely of hardtack, a notoriously tough, unleavened biscuit, and salted meat, often pork or beef, preserved to withstand months at sea. Fresh provisions were a luxury, quickly depleted, meaning the crew lived on a diet that, while caloric, was desperately lacking in vitamins. Scurvy, a debilitating disease caused by vitamin C deficiency, was a constant threat, its creeping symptoms of lethargy, bleeding gums, and open sores a grim reminder of their dependence on the sea. The water, too, was rationed, often tasting stale or brackish after weeks in the ship's tanks. The culinary delights on offer usually consisted of hardtack, which was basically a biscuit so tough it could double as a building material, and salted meat that had probably seen more oceans than the ship itself. It certainly wasn't the kind of fare that would inspire a 5-star review on Yelp. Quirky tidbit: to combat the monotony and the grim reality of their provisions, some ships, including those on these cable expeditions, would bring live animals aboard, chickens, pigs, even a cow, to provide fresh meat and eggs for as long as possible. Imagine the surreal sight of a sow wandering on deck, oblivious to its fate, while thousands of miles of cable unspooled into the depths. It was a fleeting, desperate attempt to bring a touch of the familiar, of home, to their isolated world. Sleep was a snatched luxury, often disturbed by the ship's movements, the constant noise, or the sudden call to action. You see men sleeping wherever they can find a moment's rest, in cramped hammocks below deck, on coils of rope, or even propped against a bulkhead, their bodies adapting to the perpetual motion. Personal space was virtually non-existent, and privacy, a forgotten concept. But it wasn't just the physical hardships that weighed on the crew. The mental toll of isolation was immense. No letters, no newspapers, no way to know if their families were safe or if the world they left behind even remembered them. The vastness of the ocean, stretching endlessly in every direction, could be both awe-inspiring and utterly terrifying, a liquid prison from which there was no escape until the mission was complete. Loneliness was a palpable presence, a silent passenger sharing their cramped quarters. To cope, they relied on each other. Stories were told and retold, games of cards or dice were played for meager stakes, and songs were sung, their voices carrying faintly over the engine noise. A powerful camaraderie was forged in the crucible of shared hardship, a bond born of mutual dependence and a common, audacious goal. Yet, underneath this camaraderie, a constant, low-level anxiety hummed. Every dip and swell of the ship, every unusual sound from the cable machinery, sent a ripple of tension through the crew. The cable was their lifeline, yes, but also a fragile thread, constantly threatening to snap under the immense pressures of the deep, or to be severed by the unforgiving elements. You can feel their collective breath catch whenever the paying-out machinery groans or shudders, their eyes fixed on the point where the cable disappears into the sea, dreading the sudden, telltale jolt that would signify a break. And then there were the storms. The shift from monotonous calm to terrifying chaos could be instantaneous. You experienced it firsthand, the sudden darkening of the sky, the whipping wind that screams through the rigging, the crashing waves that rear up like monstrous, hungry beasts. The ship, which moments before felt like a sturdy fortress, now becomes a toy, tossed and slammed by the furious ocean. Men cling to anything solid, their faces pale with fear, as the decks become awash with water and the ship groans as if in agony. In such moments, the thought of the cable, miles of it already laid, becomes almost unbearable. Will it hold? Will it snap? Every man on board knows that a broken cable in the midst of a gale means not just a setback, but potentially the loss of everything, forcing them to start all over again, or worse, abandoning the dream entirely. Historians still argue whether the constant threat of cable failure led to greater camaraderie or increased internal friction among the crew. Did it bind them together in a shared struggle against the elements, or did the relentless pressure fray nerves and spark disputes? Perhaps it was a bit of both, a complex dance between solidarity and individual strain. Regardless, the daily existence of these men was a testament to human endurance, a lonely, arduous ballet performed on the grandest stage imaginable, with the fate of global communication hanging by a thread. You've witnessed the backbreaking, mind-numbing effort of coiling that colossal serpent of cable into the ship's cavernous holds. The air in those depths was thick with the smell of tar and sweat, the constant thrum of the ship a lullaby to exhausted men. But now, the coils are settled, the ships are provisioned, and the year is 1858. A new strategy, born from the bitter lessons of 1857's failure, has been devised. Instead of one ship paying out from Ireland, and the other from Newfoundland, the mighty HMS Agamemnon and USS Niagara would meet in the vast, unforgiving middle of the Atlantic. There, they would perform a delicate, high-stakes surgical procedure, splice their respective cable ends together, and then turn their bows towards their home continents, each unspooling their lifeline as they sailed away from each other. It was a bold, almost poetic plan, a mid-ocean handshake that would bind two worlds. So, you stand on the deck of the Agamemnon, the salt spray already stinging your face as the ship set course. The rendezvous point is carefully calculated, thousands of miles from land. The journey to the middle is, for a time, uneventful, almost eerily calm. You can feel the nervous energy, the suppressed excitement among the crew. This time, surely, this time it would work. The men, though weary from previous attempts and the sheer scale of the coiling, are infused with a fragile hope. Then, you reach the designated spot, miles from any sight of land, just endless, rolling waves under an indifferent sky. The Agamemnon and Niagara maneuver cautiously, their colossal forms drawing closer. You see the signals exchanged, the preparations for the splice. This isn't just a simple knot, it's a meticulous, multi-layered connection, designed to withstand the crushing pressures of the deep and the constant tension of the payout. The engineers, their faces grim with concentration, work with a surgeon's precision. The two ends are brought together, painstakingly prepared, and finally joined. A collective, quiet breath is held. The first, fragile connection is made. The ships turn, bows pointed east and west, and the great payout begins. The cable, a slender thread against the vastness, begins its descent into the abyss. You watch it slide over the stern, disappearing beneath the waves, a silent prayer on the lips of every man. For a few precious hours, all seems well. The telegraph instruments on board hum with test signals, faint but clear. A thrill courses through you, a whisper of triumph. Could this really be it? But the ocean, as you've learned, is a capricious beast, and fate, it seems, has a cruel sense of humor. The Agamemnon, battling a rising swell, suddenly lurches. A sickening jolt reverberates through the deck. The indicator on the dynamometer, which measures the tension on the cable, spikes wildly. A collective gasp. The cable, unable to withstand the sudden strain, snaps. It's an instant, sharp crack that feels like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. You stare, horrified, at the frayed end of the cable, whipping uselessly in the water, a stark reminder of the ocean's unforgiving power. The line has broken, not even 80 miles into the payout from the mid-ocean splice. Despair, thick and heavy, descends like a fog. The dream, so recently within grasp, shatters into 1,000 pieces. It's like watching your favorite streaming service buffer constantly, then just give up. You just want to scream. Just connect already! The immediate aftermath is a flurry of activity, but it's activity born of desperation. The cable is lost, swallowed by the deep. The ship must be turned around, a difficult and dangerous maneuver in the swelling sea. The process of grappling for the lost cable begins. Imagine trying to fish for a single, thin strand of spaghetti in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, in the dark, during a hurricane. That's essentially what they were attempting. Giant grappling hooks, lowered on strong ropes, dragged across the ocean floor, hoping to snag the elusive lifeline. Hours turn into days. The men, their faces etched with fatigue and frustration, haul in empty hooks, again and again. Finally, miraculously, after agonizing effort, the cable is recovered. It's a moment of immense relief, a brief flicker of hope in the encroaching gloom. The ships meet again, the engineers prepare for another splice, their hands trembling, their nerves frayed. This time, the tension in the air is palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket. Every eye is on the cable as it's rejoined. They start again. The cable pays out. For a little longer this time, the signals flow. You feel a cautious optimism creeping back. Perhaps the first break was a fluke, a cruel twist of an unkind sea. But then, it happens again. Another jolt. Another snap. This time, it's the Niagara's turn. The cable parts, swallowed by the waves, leaving both ships once again disconnected from their shared purpose. It feels like the cable itself has decided it's had enough of this drama and just wants to be left alone at the bottom of the ocean. This second break, so soon after the first, sends a wave of demoralization through both crews. Arguments flare among the leadership. Cyrus Field, the driving force behind the project, battles with the engineers and captains. Some advocate returning to Ireland, admitting defeat. Others, stubborn and tenacious, insist on one more try. You can almost hear the heated debates echoing across the waves, the clash of scientific caution against entrepreneurial zeal. Historians still argue whether the decision to push on after these initial failures was an act of admirable perseverance or reckless stubbornness, given the known issues with cable strength and laying equipment. The ships, battered by rising storms and the relentless stress of their task, attempt yet another splice. The weather deteriorates rapidly. You're tossed about on deck as the Agamemnon pitches and rolls violently. Waves crash over the bow, sweeping across the deck. Men cling to railings, their faces pale. The cable, even when successfully spliced, is under immense strain. The paying out machinery groans and clanks, threatening to seize. The storm rages for days, a relentless assault. The ship itself suffers damage. A wave smashes into the rigging, and the great mainmast is nearly lost. It's a near catastrophic event, not just for the cable, but for the very survival of the ship and its crew. You wonder if the ocean is personally offended by this attempt to string a wire across its domain. During one particularly harrowing stretch, as the ship plunged and rose, a new kind of breakage occurred. Not just a snap from tension, but a kink. The cable, under immense pressure and movement, twisted upon itself, forming a tight, irreparable loop that then fractured. This was a quirky tidbit of failure, a less obvious flaw than a straightforward snap, indicating the complex interplay of forces at play. It was a reminder that even if the tension was right, other, more insidious forces could doom the project. The continuous cycle of laying, breaking, grappling, and splicing drains the men physically and mentally. Sleep becomes a luxury. Meals are often cold and eaten in silence, punctuated only by the groans of the ship and the roar of the wind. Every face you see is etched with exhaustion and a growing sense of futility. The hope that had buoyed them at the start has been replaced by a grim determination, or for many, simply a desire for it all to end. They've been at sea for weeks, engaged in this Sisyphean task. It feels like they're trying to install Wi-Fi in the middle of the Atlantic with a really, really long Ethernet cable, and every time they get close, a giant sea monster trips over it. Finally, after 3 separate attempts at laying the cable from the mid-ocean splice point, and suffering multiple agonizing breakages, the collective will breaks. The cable, now significantly shortened, is deemed unlayable. The decision is made, a heavy burden on the shoulders of the leaders. The expedition must be aborted. The ships, defeated and demoralized, turn their bows towards Queenstown, Ireland. You feel the profound, crushing disappointment, the weight of failure settling over the ship. All that effort, all that hope, all that money, for nothing but a handful of broken dreams at the bottom of the sea. You stand on the deck of the HMS Agamemnon, or perhaps the USS Niagara, and the very air vibrates with a pressure that has nothing to do with the ship's engines. It's a pressure that seeps into your bones, a relentless, invisible weight born of exhaustion, fear, and the unforgiving elements of the vast North Atlantic. The dramatic struggles of the 1858 attempt, the sudden breaks, the frantic recoveries, they haven't just been events, they've been hammer blows to the collective spirit, leaving everyone raw and frayed. Your body, quite frankly, is screaming. You haven't had a proper night's sleep in weeks, maybe months. The concept of proper sleep has been redefined to snatched moments of unconsciousness, usually in a hammock that sways with the ship's perpetual roll, often to the rhythmic groan of the timbers and the constant clatter of machinery. Even when you close your eyes, the image of the cable, thick and dark, unspooling into the abyss, is burned onto the inside of your eyelids. Every muscle aches, a deep, persistent throb from days spent hauling, lifting, bracing against the ship's lurch. You've become intimately familiar with the feeling of salt spray on your face, drying to a crust, and the perpetual dampness of your clothes, never quite drying out in the humid, enclosed spaces below deck. Your hands are a map of calluses, blisters, and the occasional nasty cut from a snagged rope or a piece of metal. It's a kind of weariness that goes beyond mere tiredness. It's an existential fatigue, a bone-deep exhaustion that makes you wonder if you'll ever feel truly rested again. You might even find yourself laughing hysterically at the sight of a particularly plump seagull, just because your brain has decided it's the funniest thing it's seen all week. But the physical toll, as brutal as it is almost secondary to the mental strain. Imagine being stuck on a floating iron box, thousands of miles from the nearest land, with a task so monumental, so unprecedented, that failure feels like an almost inevitable outcome. The air is thick with unspoken anxiety. Every sudden lurch of the ship, every unusual sound from the cable machinery, sends a jolt of ice through your veins. Is it breaking again? Has all this Herculean effort been for naught? You watch the engineers, the officers, men like Wildman Whitehouse and Charles Bright, their faces etched with the same profound worry, their eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights poring over instruments and calculations. They carry the burden of the entire project, the millions of pounds already invested, a mainstream historical fact. The initial cable project alone cost over £350,000, an astronomical sum for the time, equivalent to tens of millions today. The hopes of 2 nations, resting precariously on this single, fragile thread. Fear, cold and sharp, is your constant companion. It's the fear of the unknown depths, of the crushing pressure that could snap the cable like a twig. It's the fear of the ocean itself, a vast, indifferent entity that could swallow your ship whole in a fit of pique. You've seen storms that would make even the most seasoned sailor whisper prayers, waves rising like liquid mountains, threatening to swamp the deck and tear away the precious cable. The ship becomes a tiny cork on an infinite, angry sea, and you, a speck upon it, utterly at the mercy of forces you cannot comprehend, let alone control. And then there's the fear of making a mistake yourself. One wrong move, one moment of inattention at the winding gear, one slip of the hand, and you could be the one responsible for severing the connection, for undoing weeks of agonizing labor. The weight of that potential blame, the thought of being the individual who plunged the world back into silence, is almost unbearable. It's enough to make you double-check everything, triple-check, even when your eyes are blurring from fatigue. You might even start talking to the cable, whispering reassurances to it, as if it were a sentient being that just needed a bit of encouragement to behave. The elements are not just unforgiving, they are actively hostile. The North Atlantic, in particular, seems determined to thwart human ambition. One moment, the sun glints off the waves, offering a fleeting moment of deceptive calm. The next, a thick, impenetrable fog rolls in, reducing visibility to mere yards, making navigation a nightmare and adding another layer of anxiety to the already tense atmosphere. Or a squall descends with shocking suddenness, whipping the sea into a frenzy, sending torrents of rain lashing across the deck. The cold seeps into your bones, a damp, penetrating chill that no amount of wool or oilskin seems to fully ward off. Imagine trying to perform delicate mechanical work, or simply hold your footing, on a deck slick with spray, pitching and rolling violently, with your fingers numb with cold. It's a constant battle against the environment, a ceaseless struggle to maintain control over the machinery, over your own body, over the very course of the ship. And through it all, the cable continues to unwind, a dark serpent disappearing into the gray depths. The pressure is relentless, a continuous hum of expectation and dread. There's no pause, no moment to truly catch your breath. Even when the machinery is running smoothly, you're on high alert, listening, watching, anticipating the next snag, the next sudden jerk, the next telltale dip in the tension. The officers are under immense pressure from Cyrus Field, the driving force behind this audacious dream, who, by this point, had sunk not only his own fortune but also the fortunes of many investors into this seemingly impossible endeavor. He had returned to sea despite doctor's orders, a testament to his unyielding will, but also adding to the palpable tension on board. Every decision, from the speed of the ship to the tension on the cable, is critical, potentially determining success or failure. The monotony itself becomes a form of torture. Day blends into night, night into day, marked only by the shifting watches and the slow, agonizing depletion of the cable drums. The endless horizon, the unchanging rhythm of the ship, the repetitive clatter of the machinery, it's a sensory deprivation of sorts, broken only by moments of acute crisis. Your mind, starved of new stimuli, begins to play tricks. You might see phantom ships on the horizon, or hear voices in the wind. This prolonged isolation, combined with the extreme physical and mental stress, took a severe toll on the crew's well-being. A quirky tidbit: some sailors, in an effort to combat the mind-numbing sameness, reportedly started elaborate games of spot the whale, or tried to guess the exact number of knots of cable that would be laid in the next hour, turning the grim reality into a strange, desperate form of entertainment. It was a coping mechanism, a way to keep the encroaching madness at bay. Historians still argue whether the engineers truly understood the deep-sea conditions and the immense psychological toll such a prolonged, high-stakes endeavor would take on the human psyche. Was there adequate consideration given to the mental health of the crew, beyond the basic needs of food and shelter? Or was the prevailing Victorian attitude one of simply getting on with it, regardless of the personal cost? There's an ongoing debate about the extent to which the financial pressures influenced the decision-making process during these fraud expeditions. Were corners cut in testing? Were risks taken that, in hindsight, seem reckless, all in the name of speed and cost saving? These questions linger, adding layers to the already complex narrative of human endeavor against overwhelming odds. You yearn for land, for solid ground beneath your feet, for a moment of quiet, for a hot meal that doesn't taste vaguely of salt and desperation. You dream of home, of loved ones, of simple comforts that now seem like luxuries from another lifetime. But there is no turning back. The sheer momentum of the project, the vast amount of cable already laid, the immense investment of time, money, and human spirit compels you forward. You are locked into this desperate dance with the ocean, bound by the unspooling cable, driven by a hope that, despite all the setbacks, refuses to die. You might even start to believe that if you just hum the right tune, the cable will behave better, a ridiculous notion, but one your sleep-deprived brain clings to. The pressure is constant, a vice grip on your mind and body, but the faint, flickering hope of success, of finally connecting the world, is the only thing that keeps you, and everyone else on board, from completely breaking. The vast, indifferent canvas of the Atlantic stretches around you, an endless expanse of shifting blues and grays. But for once, it's not just an empty void. Out here, in the very middle of nowhere, two colossal vessels, the HMS Agamemnon and the USS Niagara, finally find each other. Their massive forms, usually so dominant against the horizon, now seem almost fragile, bobbing gently on the swells. The air thrums with a silence deeper than the ocean's own, a quiet born of immense tension. This isn't a friendly wave across the deck. This is a medical procedure on the grandest, most impossible scale. You feel the slight sway of the deck beneath your feet as the ships maneuver, inch by painstaking inch, closer to one another. It's like watching two sleepy giants trying to hold hands without dropping their very expensive, very long piece of spaghetti. After the repeated heartbreaks of the 1858 attempt, the sudden, violent snaps, the agonizing silence from the cable, this rendezvous feels less like a triumph and more like a last-ditch, desperate prayer. The crews, etched with exhaustion and the ghosts of past failures, watch with bated breath. Every man understands the stakes. Millions of pounds, years of relentless toil, the hopes of two continents, it all hangs by a thread, literally. The plan, after several false starts and snapped cables, was to meet in mid-ocean, splice the two halves of the cable together, and then each ship would pay out its section towards its respective continent. This particular rendezvous, on July 29, 1858, was the moment. If this didn't work, if this splice failed, the entire enterprise was likely doomed. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief, followed immediately by a collective intake of breath, as the two ships finally managed to hold a relatively stable position, close enough for the delicate work to begin. A small, makeshift hut or tent has been erected on the deck of one of the ships, often the Agamemnon, being the British vessel with much of the technical expertise. This is the operating theater, the sacred space where the miracle, or disaster, will unfold. Inside, a handful of engineers and skilled technicians gather, their faces grimly determined, illuminated by the dim glow of oil lamps, even in the middle of the day. The air is thick with anticipation, the smell of tar, and perhaps the faint, metallic tang of fear. You crane your neck, trying to see over the shoulders of the burly sailors who form an impassive, silent guard around the hut. Through a narrow opening you glimpse the cable ends, brought carefully, almost reverently, into the confined space. They look deceptively simple, thick, dark, and coiled. But you know the truth of their intricate construction. At their core, a bundle of 7 fine copper wires, twisted together, designed to carry the electrical pulses. This delicate conductor is then encased in 3 layers of gutta percha, a natural rubber-like substance, crucial for insulation in the cold, crushing depths. Around that, a wrapping of tarred hemp, and finally 18 strands of iron wire, spiraled to provide strength and protection. Now, the real artistry begins. The outer iron wires are carefully unwound and cut back, then the hemp, then the precious gutta percha. It's like peeling a very expensive, very dangerous onion. Each layer must be removed without nicking or damaging the layer beneath, especially the gutta percha, which is the lifeblood of the cable's electrical integrity. The copper conductor is then exposed, gleaming faintly in the lamp light. The engineers, their hands steady despite the ship's gentle roll, begin the painstaking work of joining the copper cores. This isn't just twisting two wires together like you might do for a broken lamp cord. Oh no. This is precision work, requiring absolute flawlessness. They carefully unlay the 7 strands of each cable end, then interweave them, strand by single strand, like braiding the hair of a giant, metallic Rapunzel. Once interwoven, each individual strand is meticulously soldered to its counterpart, creating a continuous, electrically sound connection. It's a process that demands the focus of a brain surgeon and the patience of a saint. One wrong move, one speck of dirt, one poorly made joint, and the signal would be lost, swallowed by the immense resistance of the ocean. It's the equivalent of trying to perform open-heart surgery using only a butter knife and some chewing gum, all while the patient is gently rocking on a giant waterbed. Once the copper core is perfectly joined, the real challenge of insulation begins. The gutta percha must be reapplied, not just slathered on, but carefully melted and molded around the splice, creating a seamless, waterproof, and electrically impenetrable seal. Imagine trying to make a perfect, airtight seal with warm Play-Doh, but if you fail, you lose millions of dollars and global connectivity. They use heated tools, carefully pressing and smoothing the gutta percha until it forms a continuous layer, indistinguishable from the original insulation. This process is critical. Any tiny void or impurity would allow water to seep in, shorting the entire system. A quirky tidbit you might not know: the gutta percha had to be heated to a very specific, narrow temperature range. Too hot and it would degrade, too cold and it wouldn't bond properly. It was an art as much as a science, demanding an almost intuitive feel for the material. After the gutta percha, the tarred hemp is wound back around the splice, providing a cushion. Finally, the iron wires are carefully relayed, spiraled and secured, ensuring the mechanical strength of the joint. This splice, in fact, had to be stronger than any other part of the cable, a point of concentrated resilience against the immense strain of the deep-sea laying. It's like the engineers were saying, "All right, this is where we know it's weakest, so we're going to make it the strongest point on the whole dang thing." The silence inside the hut is absolute, broken only by the quiet hum of the ship's machinery and the rhythmic lapping of the waves against the hull. The engineers work with an almost ritualistic precision, their brows furrowed in concentration. You can feel the collective breath being held by everyone on deck. No one speaks above a whisper. This isn't just a technical task, it's a desperate plea to the elements, a silent negotiation with the very forces of nature. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, though in reality, it was hours of meticulous labor, the splice is complete. It's a moment of profound, almost religious quiet. The cable is then subjected to rigorous electrical testing. On board, sensitive galvanometers are hooked up, checking for continuity, for insulation resistance, for any flicker or drop in the signal that would indicate a fault. The needle on the dial is watched with an intensity that could melt steel. You hold your breath with them. Then, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor. The needle moves. A clear, steady deflection. A signal. It works. A ripple of relief, a collective exhale, sweeps through the ship. It starts as a quiet murmur, then swells into a cheer, muted at first, then growing in volume. The engineers, their faces streaked with sweat and grime, allow themselves a rare, weary smile. They've done it. They've connected the impossible. For this one precious moment, 2 ships, 2 nations, 2 continents, are linked by a fragile, yet now complete, thread. The cable is carefully lowered into the water, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, as the ships turn and begin their separate, arduous journeys. The Agamemnon heads east towards Ireland, the Niagara west towards Newfoundland. The cable pays out from their holds, a continuous serpent disappearing into the vast, dark unknown. You watch it go, a thin, dark line against the churning white of the wake, carrying with it the hopes of an entire generation. You can't help but wonder, watching that fragile line disappear, about the future of this connection. Historians still argue whether the initial splice itself contributed to the later rapid failure of the 1858 cable, or if subsequent issues were purely due to overvoltage or inherent cable flaws. But for now, in this exhilarating, terrifying moment, the connection holds. The dream, for a fleeting, precious while, is real. The endless, heaving gray of the Atlantic, a relentless panorama of nothing but water and sky, has been your world for weeks. Days bleed into weeks, each one a slow, agonizing crawl, measured only by the rhythmic clanking of the cable paying out and the ever-present thrum of the ship's engines. Your eyes, accustomed to the vast, featureless expanse, now ache for a different kind of horizon. And then, one morning, it appears. A smudge. A faint, dark line on the distant rim of the world, growing steadily more defined with each passing hour. It's land. Not just any land, but the rugged, pine-scented shores of Newfoundland. A collective gasp ripples through the crew, followed by a cheer that starts as a tentative murmur and swells into a roaring crescendo. It's a sound you haven't heard in weeks, a primal expression of relief and triumph that banishes the weary silence of the ocean. The air, usually thick with the metallic tang of machinery and the damp chill, suddenly feels lighter, charged with an electric anticipation. You stand at the railing, your body vibrating with exhaustion, but your spirit soaring. The smell of pine and damp earth, carried on the breeze, is more intoxicating than any fine wine. It smells of home, or at least, the promise of connection to it. The USS Niagara, your sister ship and constant companion on this arduous journey, has already arrived. You watch her, a proud silhouette against the burgeoning morning light, her mastheads already adorned with celebratory flags. She reached Trinity Bay first, having laid her portion of the cable from mid-ocean, meticulously spooling it out towards this wild, beautiful coast. Now, as the Agamemnon finally steams into the sheltered waters of the bay, the scene is one of utter pandemonium, the good kind. Smaller boats, filled with curious locals and eager officials, dart around the colossal ships like excited minnows around whales. Their cheers echo across the water, mingling with the jubilant blasts of the ship's whistles, a symphony of relief and a hint of disbelief. The final moments of the cable laying are a delicate dance, a final, nerve-wracking act after weeks of brutal exertion. You watch as a small, sturdy boat, manned by a dedicated shore party, carefully takes the end of the cable from the Niagara. This isn't just any rope, it's the culmination of years of dreams, failures, and back-breaking labor. It's the thread that promises to stitch two continents together. The men in the boat row with a reverence usually reserved for sacred relics, slowly, deliberately, pulling the precious lifeline towards the rocky shore. The cable, thick and dark, slips over the gunwale of the boat, a serpent of copper and gutta percha finally touching land after its long, deep-sea journey. On shore, a crowd has gathered, a mix of local fishermen, a few bewildered sheep, and formally dressed dignitaries whose top hats seem hilariously out of place against the rugged, windswept backdrop. They lean forward, straining for a glimpse of this modern marvel. The moment the cable is dragged ashore, a cheer erupts from the crowd that could probably be heard all the way back in Ireland if the wind was just right. It's truly a sight to behold, the very end of the cable, brought through the crashing surf, finally secured to an onshore telegraph station. It feels like watching someone plug in the world's biggest, most important USB stick, except it's a lot slower, and there's no annoying, ding, sound. The air crackles with anticipation, a tangible hum of nervous energy. Has it worked? After all this, after the breakages, the storms, the sheer, mind-numbing effort, will it actually work? The telegraph station, a small, unassuming building that suddenly feels like the most important place on Earth, becomes the focal point of everyone's attention. Inside, the chief electrician, a man whose face is a roadmap of stress and sleepless nights, prepares to send the first official message. This is the moment of truth, the ultimate test of all their trials. The room is hushed, save for the rhythmic clicking of the telegraph key as the first dots and dashes are painstakingly tapped out. Each click is a heartbeat, a tiny pulse of hope traveling across the ocean floor. The message, a simple but profound statement, is sent from Queen Victoria in the United Kingdom to President James Buchanan in the United States. This is the mainstream historical fact that echoes through time, the very first official transatlantic telegraphic communication. Imagine a message traveling almost instantly across an ocean that once took weeks, even months, to traverse by ship. It's a leap in human communication that makes our current obsession with Wi-Fi passwords seem, well, a little less dramatic. You wait, holding your breath, as the minutes tick by. It feels like an eternity. Has it gone through? Is the connection stable? Then, a faint sound, a distant, almost imperceptible click click click, begins to emanate from the receiving apparatus. It's the faint, ghostly echo of a message arriving from across the sea. The room erupts. Not with a roar, but with a collective, choked sob of relief and disbelief. Tears stream down the faces of hardened sailors and stoic engineers alike. It's done. They've done it. The message from Queen Victoria, a beacon of international goodwill, reads: Europe and America are united by telegraphic communication. Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. In response, President Buchanan's message expressed the hope that it will prove a bond of perpetual peace and friendship between the kindred nations, and an instrument of providence to diffuse religion, liberty, and law throughout the world. Poetic, right? Not exactly a "Yo, what's up, fam?" text, but then again, they didn't have emojis back then. The initial success sparks an explosion of global jubilation. News spreads like wildfire, carried by the very telegraph lines that now felt so inadequate compared to the new transatlantic link. Celebrations erupt in cities across both continents. In New York, church bells ring, cannons fire, and parades fill the streets. Buildings are draped in flags, and bonfires blaze, illuminating the night sky with the glow of triumph. It's a moment of pure, unadulterated euphoria. A quirky tidbit that often gets lost in the grand narrative is the sheer, unadulterated awe of the local Newfoundlanders. Many of them had never even seen a telegraph machine before, let alone understood the concept of a message traveling through a wire under the ocean. For them, it was almost magical, a true miracle unfolding on their rugged doorstep. They'd seen the ships, heard the stories of the cable, but to witness the actual landing, to feel the vibrations of the celebratory cannons, it must have felt like stepping into a science fiction novel. Imagine trying to explain Wi-Fi to someone from 1858. It's that level of mind-bending. The celebration on the ships, once the initial messages were confirmed, was legendary. Rations of rum were distributed, and the tired, grimy crew, who had battled the ocean and their own exhaustion for weeks, finally let loose. There were toasts, songs, and probably a few questionable dance moves performed on slippery decks. The tension that had been a constant companion for so long finally dissipated, replaced by a profound sense of accomplishment. You join in the revelry, the taste of cheap rum surprisingly sweet after weeks of salt and sweat. Every ache in your body, every moment of fear, every instance of despair, now feels worth it. However, historians still argue whether the initial public euphoria surrounding the 1858 cable's success was truly widespread, or if it was largely confined to the educated and commercial classes. While newspapers certainly trumpeted the achievement, the broader impact on the average person, especially in more rural areas, might have been less immediate and more abstract than the grand celebrations suggest. Was it truly a moment that united everyone in joy, or just those who understood its profound implications? It's a nuanced point, much like debating whether people were more excited about the first iPhone or the ability to finally send a really long chain email. For now, though, those debates are far in the future. In this moment, standing on the deck of the Agamemnon, watching the lights of Trinity Bay twinkle in the distance, you feel nothing but overwhelming pride. You were part of this. You helped lay the first thread of global communication. The dream, once impossible, is now a reality. The world, for the first time, truly feels connected. The silence of the ocean has been broken, replaced by the faint, miraculous hum of human connection. Sleep, when it finally comes, is deep and dreamless, the first truly peaceful slumber you've had in a very long time. You stand there, a phantom breeze from Trinity Bay, Newfoundland, still ruffling your hair, the echoes of cannons and church bells still reverberating in your memory. The sheer, unadulterated euphoria of August 5, 1858, when the USS Niagara finally dropped anchor, the cable secured to the shore, was a feeling unlike any other. You saw the crew, weary but triumphant, embrace. You heard the cheers, the shouts, the overwhelming relief that after so many years, so many failures, so much backbreaking labor, it was done. The connection was made. The world held its breath, waiting for the first whispers of the future. And those whispers came. Faint, yes, but undeniably there. The very first message, a humble "Europe and America are united by telegraph. Glory to God in the highest, on earth peace and goodwill toward men," sent from Cyrus Field's office in Newfoundland to Valentia, Ireland. Think about that for a moment. Imagine the sheer, mind-boggling wonder of sending words across an ocean in minutes, not weeks. It was like going from sending carrier pigeons to launching a satellite. The impossible had been achieved. Queen Victoria herself sent a message to President Buchanan, a grand total of 98 words taking almost 16 hours to transmit, but still, it worked. You could practically hear the collective gasp of humanity across 2 continents. Celebrations erupted worldwide, spontaneous parades, fireworks painting the night sky, buildings illuminated, bells ringing. New York City went absolutely wild, a grand parade, a massive fireworks display in City Hall Park where, in a rather ironic twist of fate, the City Hall cupola caught fire. Whoops. A little too much enthusiasm, perhaps, but entirely understandable given the magnitude of the achievement. You feel the glow of that victory, the warmth of that shared human triumph. It's a beautiful, fragile thing. But then, almost imperceptibly at first, a chill begins to creep in. The signals, which were never robust to begin with, start to falter. The distinct, crisp taps of the Morse code key begin to sound tired, garbled. Like a bad phone connection that keeps cutting out, or when your Wi-Fi decides it's had enough and just wants to nap. You know the feeling, that annoying little digital stutter that makes you want to throw your device across the room. Now imagine that feeling, amplified by an entire ocean and the hopes of 2 continents. The engineers on both sides, still basking in the glow of their success, initially dismissed it as teething problems. "Oh, it's just settling in," they might have murmured, sipping their tea, perhaps a little too confidently. "A few glitches, nothing we can't sort out." They try adjusting the voltage, tweaking the instruments. But the problem persists. The messages become slower, more jumbled. Hours stretch into days for a single sentence to trickle through. It's like watching a candle flame slowly dim, flickering weaker and weaker, a tiny light against an encroaching darkness. Then comes the silence. A profound, echoing, dreadful silence. On September 1, 1858, just under a month after its triumphant completion, the transatlantic cable went dead. One moment, a faint, struggling signal, the next, nothing. Just the deafening hum of static, the empty click of the telegraph key. It's the kind of silence that screams louder than any noise. You stand there, your heart sinking, watching the faces of the operators turn from hopeful anticipation to grim resignation. All that effort, all that risk, all that suffering, for this. The immediate reaction is a frantic scramble. They try everything. Sending stronger currents, hoping to jolt the unresponsive line back to life. It's like trying to resuscitate a patient with a defibrillator, but the patient is 2,000 miles long and at the bottom of the ocean. Just turn it off and on again. You might want to shout, a modern-day reflex. But alas, the 19th century equivalent of rebooting an undersea cable involved rather more complex and utterly futile maneuvers. The truth, which would only become clear much later, was that the cable's delicate insulation, already compromised by manufacturing imperfections and the immense pressures of the deep, had likely been fatally damaged by the excessively high voltage applied by the chief electrician, Wildman Whitehouse, in his desperate attempts to improve the signals. It was a classic case of trying to fix a leaky bucket by pouring more water into it, only faster. The world, which had just erupted in joyous celebration, now plunged into a bitter mix of disappointment and outright suspicion. The public, fickle as ever, swung from adulation to accusations of fraud. "It was all a hoax!" cried some newspapers. A grand deception to fleece investors, declared others. You can practically hear the collective groan of despair that rippled across the globe. After all the fanfare, the fireworks, the grand pronouncements of a new era, to have it all vanish so quickly felt like a cruel joke. It was like being promised a jetpack and then being handed a pogo stick. A very, very broken pogo stick. The heartbreak is palpable. For the men who had toiled for years, who had faced down storms and mechanical failures, who had poured their very souls into this monumental undertaking, it was a crushing blow. Imagine dedicating your life to building a bridge across an impossible chasm, only for it to crumble into dust the moment the first person steps on it. The weight of that failure, the public scorn, the financial ruin that loomed large, must have been unbearable. The dream of instant global communication, so tantalizingly close, receded once more into the realm of fantasy. The world went back to weeks-long voyages for messages, to the slow, ponderous pace of sailing ships and the uncertainty of distant news. The brief, glorious flicker of connection was extinguished, leaving behind only the cold, dark ocean and the bitter taste of defeat. It was a stark reminder of the immense power of nature, and the still limited understanding of the deep-sea environment. Historians still argue whether the high voltage applied by Wildman Whitehouse was the sole cause of failure, or if manufacturing defects were equally culpable. Some point to the fact that the cable was submerged for months before the first message, suggesting inherent weaknesses. Others insist Whitehouse's aggressive signaling, sending hundreds of volts to a cable designed for a fraction of that, was the final, fatal blow. Regardless, the outcome was the same: silence. You feel the profound sense of loss, the heavy blanket of despair that descends. The triumphant cheers have faded, replaced by the quiet, mournful lapping of waves against the shore. The grand vision, the audacious dream, has been snatched away, leaving behind only the echo of what might have been. The world was once again disconnected, and the path to reconnecting it seemed longer, darker, and infinitely more daunting than ever before. It was, in many ways, the world's shortest-lived digital revolution, ending not with a bang, but with a whimper, and then, nothing at all. You stand amidst the wreckage, not of a ship, but of a dream. The silence that follows the 1858 cable's demise is deafening, far more impactful than any storm. One moment, the world held its breath, witnessing the miracle of transatlantic communication. The next, it exhaled in a collective, crushing sigh of disappointment. Remember that exhilarating rush, that tingling sensation as the first messages whispered across the ocean floor? Poof! Gone. Like your favorite streaming service suddenly going offline, forever, and taking all your binge-watching progress with it. The initial jubilation quickly curdles into a bitter brew of despair and skepticism. For those who had poured their fortunes and their very souls into this audacious endeavor, the silence was a personal affront, a betrayal by the very laws of physics. Imagine the faces of the investors, once beaming with pride, now contorted in a silent scream as their ledgers bled red. The Atlantic Telegraph Company, once a beacon of modern ambition, now teeters on the brink of financial ruin, a mainstream historical fact that sends shivers down the spine of anyone who understands the cold, hard reality of a failed venture. Its shares, once coveted, become virtually worthless, traded perhaps only as grim mementos of what could have been. The public, fickle as ever, turns its back. The awe that had briefly gripped the world transforms into a cynical sneer. Newspapers that once hailed the cable as the eighth wonder of the world now publish scathing critiques and darkly humorous cartoons depicting a tangled mess at the bottom of the ocean, a monument to human hubris. You hear the whispers in the streets, the knowing nods among the naysayers. "I told you so," they murmur, their voices dripping with a smug satisfaction that grates on your nerves. "It was impossible from the start. A fool's errand. A grand delusion." Some even suggest it was all a clever hoax, a stock market manipulation scheme designed to fleece innocent investors, a truly quirky and fringe tidbit of conspiracy theorizing that echoes in the halls of history. The very idea of connecting continents by wire becomes a punchline, a byword for magnificent failure. For the engineers, the scientists, and the visionaries like Cyrus Field, the backlash is brutal. Every decision, every calculation, every component of the defunct cable is dissected under the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Dr. W. Whitehouse, the company's chief electrician, who had insisted on using high voltage to send signals through the cable, becomes a particular target. Was his experimental method the fatal flaw? Was it the cable's design, its fragile copper heart encased in gutta percha, unable to withstand the immense pressures of the deep? Or was it the unforgiving ocean itself, determined to guard its secrets? Historians still argue whether the primary culprit was the cable's inherent design flaws, the laying process, or the controversial high-voltage testing that may have degraded the insulation. It's like trying to pinpoint why your Wi-Fi suddenly stopped working after you tried to fix it by hitting it with a hammer. There are just too many variables, and everyone has a different theory. The immediate aftermath is a period of profound despondency. The grand offices of the Atlantic Telegraph Company, once bustling with activity, now echo with an unsettling quiet. The grand maps, charting the cable's path across the ocean floor, now seem like cruel jokes, mocking the ambition they once represented. You can almost smell the stale air of defeat, feel the weight of shattered hopes pressing down on the few remaining stalwarts. It takes a certain kind of stubbornness, a colossal refusal to admit defeat, to even contemplate moving forward. Many simply walk away, their pockets lighter, their spirits crushed. Who could blame them? It felt like trying to teach a goldfish to play chess, an admirable effort, perhaps, but ultimately futile. But amidst this vast ocean of doubt, tiny islands of hope begin to emerge. They are small, almost imperceptible at first, like faint signals through a dying wire. These islands are populated by the unyielding optimists, the true believers who, despite everything, refuse to let the dream die. Cyrus Field, perhaps the most prominent among them, is a man possessed. He had lost his entire fortune, his reputation was in tatters, yet he couldn't shake the conviction that it could be done. He spent years crisscrossing the Atlantic, tirelessly campaigning, speaking to anyone who would listen, trying to rekindle the spark of belief in investors and politicians. You can almost picture him, a lone figure knocking on doors, armed only with a faded map and an unshakable belief that the future needed this connection. The intervening years, from 1858 to the mid-1860s, are not idle. They are a time of quiet, meticulous scientific inquiry. The failures of the 1858 cable provide invaluable lessons. Engineers and physicists, chastened but determined, delve deeper into the properties of electricity, the behavior of materials under extreme pressure, and the intricate science of submarine telegraphy. New, more robust cable designs are proposed, focusing on greater strength, improved insulation, and a more resilient core. It's like going back to engineering school, but with the added pressure of knowing that your previous project ended up as an expensive, very long fishing line at the bottom of the sea. Slowly, painfully, the tide begins to turn. The sheer economic and strategic advantages of a working transatlantic cable remain too compelling to ignore. The American Civil War, raging across the continent, underscores the critical need for rapid communication between North America and Europe. Imagine if news from the battlefronts could reach London or Paris in minutes, not weeks. The potential for trade, diplomacy, and even peace became a powerful motivator, gradually chipping away at the thick ice of skepticism. The scientific community, having learned from the painful lessons of the past, begins to offer more refined solutions. They propose cables with multiple conducting wires, superior insulating materials like improved gutta percha, and innovative armoring techniques to protect against the crushing deep-sea environment. The very act of failure had forced a deeper understanding, pushing the boundaries of materials science and electrical engineering. This period of quiet innovation and persistent lobbying is crucial. It's the unsung hero phase, where the tedious, unglamorous work of research and development lays the groundwork for future triumphs. You feel the slow, methodical turning of gears, the quiet hum of minds dedicated to solving an immense, seemingly insurmountable problem. The despair begins to recede, replaced by a cautious, yet undeniable, resurgent hope. The dream, though battered and bruised, was far from dead. It was merely waiting for the right moment, and the right vessel, to rise again. You stand at the edge of the world, or at least, it feels that way, doesn't it? The echoes of the last attempt still hum in the air, a phantom signal that promised so much before dissolving into the vast, indifferent ocean. That crushing silence, remember it? The one that descended after the brief, exhilarating triumph of 1858, leaving the world once again disconnected, hopes dashed, and an almost palpable despair hanging heavy over the entire endeavor. It was a silence so profound, so utterly final, that it threatened to extinguish the very spark of this impossible dream. Many, oh so many, whispered that the ocean had won, that humanity was simply not meant to bridge such an abyss. The grand ambition, they sighed, was nothing more than a fool's errand. But even in the deepest troughs of despair, a tiny flicker of ingenuity, a stubborn refusal to admit defeat, can begin to glow. The problem, as it had become painfully clear, wasn't just the cable itself, or the temperamental ocean, or even the unyielding strain on the men. A fundamental flaw in the strategy had been exposed. You see, the HMS Agamemnon and the USS Niagara, magnificent as they were, simply weren't big enough. They couldn't carry the entire cable. This meant the perilous, nerve-wracking, mid-ocean splice, a moment of exquisite vulnerability where two halves of a dream had to be delicately, precariously joined in the rolling waves. It was like trying to thread a needle while riding a bucking bronco, in the dark, with a looming deadline. Far too many things could, and did, go wrong. What was needed, then, wasn't just more of the same, but something different. Something colossal. Something audacious beyond even the original audacious dream. And that's when the whispers began, growing from faint murmurs into a roaring certainty. There was a ship, a leviathan, a behemoth of iron and steam, built for another purpose entirely, yet lying in wait, almost as if destiny had designed her for this very moment. You hear her name spoken with a reverence, a mix of awe and trepidation, the Great Eastern. Now close your eyes for a moment, and picture this. Forget everything you know about ships, even the mighty Agamemnon. This is something else entirely. As you open your eyes, you behold her, truly behold her, for the first time. She doesn't just sit in the water, she dominates it. She's not just a vessel, she's a floating city, a testament to human ambition taken to an extreme. The sheer scale is almost incomprehensible. Her hull, a dark, majestic expanse of iron, stretches out before you, seemingly endless. You crane your neck, tilting your head back further and further, trying to take in her full height, her multiple funnels reaching for the sky like colossal smokestacks from an industrial dream. Her original purpose, you learn, was to be the ultimate passenger liner, designed to carry thousands of souls on epic voyages to Australia and India without needing to refuel. It was the brainchild of the legendary engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel, a man who consistently thought in terms of, how can we make it bigger, better, and more revolutionary? He was, shall we say, a maximalist? She was launched back in 1858, the same year as that heartbreaking cable failure, and was, by a significant margin, the largest ship ever built at that time. To give you a sense of scale, she was nearly 700 feet long. That's roughly 2 football fields laid end to end. Or if you prefer, about as long as 5 blue whales lined up nose to tail. She weighed over 18,000 tons, a truly staggering figure for the era. Imagine trying to park that in a busy harbor. It's like trying to parallel park a skyscraper. Her construction was a saga in itself, fraught with delays, cost overruns, and even a few unfortunate accidents. She was, in many ways, a commercial disaster in her early life, too big for most ports, too expensive to operate profitably as a passenger ship, and plagued by a series of misfortunes that led many to believe she was cursed. Historians still argue whether her initial financial woes were primarily due to her inherent design flaws or simply the unpreparedness of the shipping market for such an immense vessel. But perhaps, just perhaps, her true destiny was simply waiting to be revealed. She was a giant without a purpose, a magnificent white elephant, until the cable project, desperate for a solution, finally looked her way. What made her uniquely suited for this impossible task? Well, imagine trying to carry an entire continent's worth of string. You'd need a pretty big spool, right? The Great Eastern was that spool. Her cavernous holds, originally designed for thousands of passengers and their luggage, could be converted into immense circular tanks. You see them now, 3 colossal iron drums, each capable of holding miles and miles of coiled cable. This meant, for the first time, the entire transatlantic cable, all 2,300 nautical miles of it, weighing over 4,000 tons, could be loaded onto a single ship. No more mid-ocean splices. No more precarious rendezvous in the middle of a storm-tossed ocean. This was a game-changer of epic proportions. It was like going from trying to build a bridge with toothpicks to suddenly having access to industrial girders. Her propulsion system was also a marvel of engineering, a quirky tidbit that underscores her ambition. She didn't just have one way to move, or even two. Oh no, she had 3. She boasted both massive paddle wheels on her sides, a gigantic screw propeller at her stern, and 6 masts for sails. She was like a Swiss Army knife of maritime locomotion, ready for any condition. This combination gave her immense power and, crucially, incredible stability. Laying cable required a steady, consistent speed, often as slow as a walking pace, even in rough seas. Her immense size and multiple engines allowed her to maintain that precise control, resisting the ocean's relentless push and pull with a serene, almost stoic indifference. You can almost feel the vibrations of her mighty engines now, a low, steady thrumming that resonates deep within your bones as you stand on her vast deck. The air smells of iron paint and the faint, briny tang of the sea. Looking out from her deck, the horizon seems to stretch even further, the waves below appearing almost insignificant. This ship, you realize, is not just a vessel, she is a promise. A promise that the lessons of failure have been learned, that the scale of the challenge has finally been met with a solution of equal, if not greater, magnitude. The decision to repurpose her was not without its own set of challenges and financial gambles. She had to be refitted extensively, with those enormous cable tanks installed, along with specialized cable-laying machinery, massive sheaves, brakes, and dynamometers to control the cable's descent into the abyss. It was a monumental undertaking in itself, transforming a failed passenger liner into the ultimate deep-sea lifeline layer. But there was a renewed sense of purpose, a palpable buzz of excitement that hadn't been felt since those initial, naive days of the first attempt. As you walk her immense decks, you might even chuckle at the thought of her original grand purpose. Imagine trying to find your cabin on this ship. It would be like navigating a small town. "Excuse me, I believe my stateroom is somewhere near the 3rd cable tank, just past the port side paddle wheel." But now, that sprawling internal space, once meant for ballrooms and grand dining halls, is filled with the tightly coiled serpent of copper and gutta percha, waiting for its journey into the deep. This ship, the Great Eastern, represents a new dawn, not just for the cable project, but for the very idea of what was possible at sea. She was a gamble, a last, desperate throw of the dice, but one born of hard-won wisdom. She was the physical embodiment of the unyielding human spirit, refusing to be defeated by the ocean's vastness or the crushing weight of past failures. She stood ready, a silent, colossal testament to perseverance, poised to finally conquer the depths and connect the world forever. The stage is set, the ultimate tool is in place, and the hope that had flickered so faintly now burns with a renewed, magnificent intensity. You stand on the deck of the magnificent Great Eastern, a ship so vast it makes the Agamemnon and Niagara look like bathtub toys. Remember her? We talked about how she was practically a floating city, capable of swallowing up not just one transatlantic cable, but enough to practically knit a sweater for the entire Atlantic Ocean. This isn't just a ship, it's a statement. A declaration that humanity, armed with enough iron and steam, can truly conquer anything. The air hums with a different kind of energy this time. Less frantic hope, more quiet, steely determination. The past failures, the crushing silences, they've all been absorbed, analyzed, and transmuted into a powerful resolve. This isn't just another attempt, it's the attempt. The one that feels, finally, truly, like it has a chance. As the mighty propellers churn, pushing the colossal vessel westward from Valentia Bay, Ireland, you feel a profound shift in the atmosphere. There's a palpable sense of confidence, almost bordering on smugness, among the engineers and crew. And why not? This cable is different. It's thicker, stronger, better insulated, designed with the hard-won lessons of 2 previous failures baked right into its very core. It's a technological marvel, an umbilical cord of communication waiting to stretch across the vast, dark chasm of the Atlantic. The Great Eastern herself, designed for passenger voyages but repurposed for this epic task, handles the immense weight of the cable with ease. The massive paying-out machinery at her stern, refined and improved, hums a steady, rhythmic tune, spooling out the precious lifeline into the ocean's embrace. You watch, mesmerized, as mile after mile of the dark, serpentine cable disappears into the blue, vanishing beneath the waves, a thin thread connecting the known world to the great unknown. Days turn into weeks. The monotonous rhythm of life on a cable ship settles in. Eat, sleep, watch the cable, repeat. The gentle roll of the Great Eastern is a stark contrast to the violent pitching of her predecessors, a testament to her sheer size. You find yourself lulled by the steady thrumming of the engines and the hypnotic unspooling of the cable. The weather holds, mostly. The sea is, for the most part, unusually cooperative. It's almost easy. Too easy? A tiny, nagging voice whispers in the back of your mind. After all the previous nightmares, the storms, the snapbacks, the endless repairs, this feels suspiciously calm. It's like arriving at a theme park and finding no queues for the most popular ride. You just know something's up, right? Then it happens. A jolt. Not a physical one to the ship, but a sudden, sickening lurch in the atmosphere. The electrical testing equipment, meticulously monitored around the clock, screams. A fault. A sudden, catastrophic loss of insulation. Your heart plummets. It's a familiar, dreaded feeling. The cable has a problem. The tension on deck becomes unbearable. The paying-out machinery is stopped, the great beast of a ship brought to a halt in the middle of nowhere, thousands of miles from either shore. The engineers pore over their readings, their faces grim. The fault is confirmed. It's deep, somewhere in the miles of cable already laid. The only option, haul it back. Hauling back miles of heavy cable from the deep ocean is not for the faint of heart. It's a brutal, slow, incredibly risky process. The cable, already under immense tension from its own weight in the water, is now subjected to even more strain as it's winched back aboard. You watch, teeth gritted, as the massive machinery grinds, slowly, agonizingly, pulling the cable back from the abyss. The hope is to find the fault, cut it out, splice the good ends, and continue. But the ocean, as always, has other plans. With a sudden, terrifying jerk, the indicator on the dynamometer plunges. The cable, already weakened by the fault and the immense strain of retrieval, snaps. It doesn't just break, it parts. One moment it's there, a visible link to their progress, the next, it's gone, vanishing into the unfathomable depths, a ghostly echo of their earlier failures. A collective groan sweeps through the crew. The first major blow. But this time, they're not giving up. Not yet. They have new tools, new resolve. They have grappling hooks. Not your garden variety fishing hooks, mind you, but massive, multi-pronged claws, weighing tons, designed to snag the elusive cable from the ocean floor, miles below. Imagine trying to pick up a single strand of spaghetti from the bottom of a swimming pool, blindfolded, with a bulldozer. That's roughly the scale of the challenge. They lower these monstrous hooks, attached to miles of thick rope, into the dark. Hours turn into days as they drag the seabed, hoping, praying for a snag. It's a torturous process, battling currents, the sheer weight of the grappling rope, and the crushing pressure of the deep. You can almost hear the ocean chuckling mischievously. After days of fruitless effort, the cable is declared irretrievably lost. They try again. A new section of cable is laid. The process restarts, the Great Eastern once more paying out her precious cargo. For a time, hope flickers anew. Maybe the first break was a fluke, a cruel joke by the fickle sea. But then, it happens again. Another fault, another stop, Another agonizing attempt to retrieve the cable, another sickening snap. This time, the despair is deeper. You can see it in the slumped shoulders of the engineers, the weary resignation in the crew's eyes. It's like trying to win a game of whack-a-mole when the moles keep turning into black holes. The frustration is a living, breathing entity on board, thick and suffocating. Mainstream historical fact alert *: the Great Eastern had successfully laid over 1,200 miles of the 1865 cable, reaching a point almost two-thirds of the way across the Atlantic, before the final, irrecoverable break occurred. They were so close. Imagine running a marathon, seeing the finish line, and then suddenly your shoelaces tie themselves together, and you trip. Face plant into the pavement of despair. The final, crushing blow comes after the third break. Again, the grappling hooks are deployed. Again, the long, arduous wait. Quirky tidbit alert *: one of the remarkable aspects of the 1865 attempt was the sheer persistence in trying to grapple for the lost cable at depths exceeding 2 miles. They had developed highly specialized grappling ropes, some made of steel wires twisted with hemp, designed to withstand the immense strain. But even these marvels of engineering were pushed to their limits by the ocean's depths and the cable's weight. They tried for days, weeks even, to retrieve the lost end. The crew, already exhausted, pushed themselves to the brink. They'd snag it, pull it up 1,000 feet, then it would slip. Snag it again, pull it up, only for the grappling rope itself to snap. It was a brutal, soul-crushing cycle of near success and agonizing failure. The realization slowly dawns: this cable is lost. Truly, irrevocably lost. It lies at the bottom of the Atlantic, a monument to their incredible effort and their heartbreaking defeat. The dream, so tangible just days before, evaporates like sea mist. The Great Eastern, her hold still containing hundreds of miles of unused cable, turns eastward, back towards Ireland. The journey back is silent, heavy with the weight of failure. The buoyant optimism that marked their departure has been replaced by a profound, agonizing frustration. They were so close. So incredibly, tantalizingly close. The finish line was practically visible, and then, in a series of cruel twists, success was snatched away. It's enough to make you want to throw your own teacup overboard in frustration. The financial implications are immense, the public skepticism renewed. "I told you so," whispers the world. "It's an impossible dream." But even in the depths of this despair, a flicker of something remains. A stubborn, unyielding refusal to quit. Open scholarly debate phrase * historians still debate whether the persistent issues with the 1865 cable were primarily due to manufacturing defects that weakened it, or if the repeated breaks were simply an unavoidable consequence of the immense stresses of deep-sea laying, combined with the extreme difficulty of retrieval. Was it an inherent flaw, or just bad luck and an unforgiving environment? Regardless, the pain of "so close yet so far" burns deep. The dream, though battered, is not yet broken. You stand once more on the deck of the Great Eastern, but this time, the air feels different. It's not the raw, desperate hope of 1865, nor the weary resignation of 1858. No, this time, in the summer of 1866, there's a quiet, steely resolve that hums beneath the deck plates, a grim determination etched onto every face you see. The colossal ship, looking less like a vessel and more like a floating city, is ready for its third dance with the deep, its holds once again brimming with the precious, coiled serpent of copper and gutta percha. You can almost hear the ocean itself sighing, "Oh, it's you again!" The lessons from the agonizing failure of 1865 have been meticulously absorbed. Every flaw in the cable-laying machinery has been addressed, every weak point in the cable itself reinforced. You see improved grappling equipment, stronger brakes, and a crew whose experience now borders on the supernatural when it comes to coaxing a fragile thread across an abyss. They've seen it all, these men. Breakages, storms, near mutiny from exhaustion, the soul-crushing silence of a dead line. They are, in a very real sense, the world's first deep-sea cable specialists, though their job title was probably just extremely tired sailor. The Great Eastern, with its gargantuan proportions, feels almost indestructible, a leviathan of progress. You watch as the massive cable, thicker and more robust than previous iterations, begins its slow, steady journey into the Atlantic's embrace. The process is still painstaking, a delicate balance of speed and tension. The cable pays out from the stern, a continuous dark line disappearing into the frothing wake. The machinery whirs, a hypnotic, mechanical lullaby that accompanies every mile unwound. You feel the ship's powerful engines thrumming beneath your feet, a constant vibration that becomes part of your very being. Days bleed into weeks, marked by the rhythmic clatter of the paying out gear, the watch changes, and the endless expanse of gray-blue ocean. The monotony is punctuated by moments of acute anxiety, a sudden jolt, a suspicious reading on the electrical instruments, a brief scare that sends a ripple of dread through the crew. Each time, the skilled engineers and electricians spring into action, their faces illuminated by the dim glow of their instruments, their hands moving with practiced precision. They are like deep-sea surgeons, constantly monitoring the pulse of their patient, the cable, as it descends into the dark. One of the most remarkable aspects of this 1866 expedition, something that still makes you blink in disbelief, wasn't just the laying of a new cable, but the audacious plan to retrieve the one lost in 1865. Imagine dropping a tiny thread into a canyon thousands of feet deep, then trying to fish it out a year later with a grappling hook. It sounds like a bad joke, or perhaps a particularly frustrating game of pin the tail on the donkey played with a continent-sized blindfold. Yet, that's exactly what they set out to do. You witnessed the painstaking process. The Great Eastern would steam back and forth, dragging a colossal 5-pronged grappling hook across the seabed, miles below. It's an exercise in monumental patience and incredible navigational skill. The ship's exact position had to be known with a precision that was almost unheard of for the time, using celestial navigation and dead reckoning. You can practically hear the collective sigh of relief, or perhaps a collective groan of effort, as the heavy rope, attached to the grappling hook, finally feels a snag. Pulling up miles of submerged cable from depths of 2 miles is no trivial matter. It's a Herculean task, requiring all the ship's winches and the brute strength of the crew. You watch as the mud-encrusted, barnacle-laden cable, looking like a monstrous, forgotten sea serpent, slowly emerges from the depths. It's a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph, a testament to human ingenuity and stubbornness. They find it, they repair it, and then, with renewed vigor, they splice it into a new section, completing the circuit. This feat alone, the recovery of the 1865 cable, is a historical marvel, often overshadowed by the main event. Historians still argue whether the recovery of the 1865 cable was a more impressive feat of engineering than laying the 1866 one, given the navigational challenges and sheer improbability of it all. But back to the primary mission, the 1866 cable. Day after day, the drum turns, the cable slides away, and the distance to Newfoundland shrinks. The tension on board is palpable, a quiet hum beneath the surface of daily life. Every electrical test is met with bated breath. Every hum, every click from the instruments, is scrutinized. You can feel the collective will of the crew pushing the ship forward, urging the cable on. Then, one glorious morning you see it. The familiar, rugged coastline of Newfoundland emerges from the mist. Trinity Bay, the destination that has haunted their dreams and nightmares for years, is finally within sight. A wave of exhilaration, so potent it almost knocks you off your feet, sweeps through the ship. Cheers erupt, hoarse and joyful, echoing across the water. It's a sound of pure, unadulterated relief, the kind that comes after years of struggle. On July 27, 1866, the shore end of the new cable is finally landed at Heart's Content, Newfoundland. You are there, witnessing the final, triumphant act. The cheers from the shore mingle with those from the ship, a cacophony of celebration. The cable is connected to the telegraph station, and the first clear, unmistakable messages begin to flow. "A message from Valentia, Ireland!" someone shouts, and the words are read aloud, slow and deliberate, but perfectly clear. The world holds its breath, listening to the impossible. "We have arrived safely. All well. Thank God. It's not Shakespeare, perhaps, but it's more profound than any poem. It's the sound of two continents, separated by thousands of miles of crushing ocean, finally whispering to each other. You feel a tear prick your eye, a lump in your throat. This isn't just a cable, it's a lifeline, a nervous system for the planet. And then, the impossible becomes doubly impossible. Just weeks later, after the 1866 cable is firmly established and humming with messages, the recovered 1865 cable is also successfully landed and connected. Now, not one, but two transatlantic telegraph cables are operational, a double triumph that beggars belief. It's like discovering you not only found your lost car keys, but also a spare set you didn't know you had. The floodgates of communication open. Messages that once took weeks to cross the ocean by steamship now arrive in minutes. News from Europe reaches America almost instantly, and vice versa. Stock market prices, political developments, personal greetings, the world shrinks, its pulse quickening with the speed of electrical signals. You can imagine the bewildered postman, suddenly out of a job, muttering about progress under his breath. This isn't just a technical achievement, it's a revolution. The lonely job of laying the cable is over, but its legacy is just beginning. The perseverance, the failures, the sheer, unyielding will of those who believed in the dream have finally paid off. You feel a profound sense of awe at what human beings, when united by a seemingly impossible goal, can achieve. The ocean, once an impassable barrier, has been tamed, not by force, but by a thin, copper thread. And you were there, witnessing the moment the world truly became connected forever. You stand now, in the quiet aftermath, on the shores of a world forever changed. The last triumphant message has hummed its way across the deep, the Great Eastern has returned to port, and the lonely job of laying the first transatlantic telegraph cable is finally complete. But the echoes of that monumental undertaking resonate far beyond the immediate cheers and the celebratory champagne. What you've witnessed, what those brave, often isolated men achieved, was nothing less than the birth of our modern, hyper-connected world. Before 1866, news from Europe to America, or vice versa, traveled at the speed of a steamship, a leisurely, often agonizing 10 days, sometimes more. Imagine waiting 10 days for stock market results, 10 days for news of a family crisis, 10 days to know if war had broken out. It was like living in a perpetual state of dial-up internet, where every piece of information came with a significant buffering delay. Now, with the cable humming, messages could cross the ocean in minutes. Minutes! Think of the immediate impact. Journalists could report events almost as they happened, stock markets in London and New York could react in near real time, and governments could communicate during crises without days of dangerous, information-starved lag. It's hard for us, now, to truly grasp the seismic shift this represented. We complain if our Wi-Fi is slow for 5 seconds, but back then, 5 days was considered fast. This wasn't just about sending hello across the ocean. This was about transforming global commerce. Merchants could now react instantly to price changes, shifting supply and demand across continents with unprecedented speed. A sudden glut of cotton in Liverpool could be known in New Orleans before the ships carrying the next harvest even left port. New industries blossomed around this new speed of information. Suddenly, the world became a much smaller, more responsive place for anyone with the means to send a telegram. It was the original information highway. Only instead of digital packets, it was electrical pulses, and instead of fiber optics, it was copper wire wrapped in gutta percha. And yes, those initial messages were still quite expensive. You weren't sending your daily cat photos or your thoughts on what you had for dinner. Every word counted, literally. People became masters of telegraphic brevity, a skill that, thankfully, didn't quite stick around for our rambling social media posts. Politically, the cable was a game changer. Diplomats could iron out misunderstandings, coordinate strategies, and even prevent conflicts by having direct, immediate lines of communication. No longer would a declaration of war arrive weeks after the fighting had already begun, causing awkward, "Oh, were we fighting? We hadn't got the memo yet" moments. This was a direct line, a pulse of connection, allowing for a level of international diplomacy and coordination that had simply been impossible before. The sheer audacity of the project, the repeated failures, the relentless human effort, it all laid the groundwork for the hyperconnected world you inhabit today. That initial transatlantic cable was the ancestor of every fiber optic line that crisscrosses the ocean floor, carrying unimaginable amounts of data right now, as you listen. It was the first step from a world of isolated land masses to a global village. It proved that seemingly impossible engineering feats could be achieved through sheer grit, scientific innovation, and an unwavering belief in a vision. Those men, toiling in the loneliness of the vast ocean, were paradoxically building the very infrastructure that would make future generations less lonely, more connected. You might wonder, with all the technological marvels we have, how such a simple wire could be so significant. Well, mainstream historical fact time. The success of the 1866 cable directly led to a rapid expansion of the global telegraph network. Within a few decades, cables snaked across every ocean, connecting continents, empires, and markets in a web of instant communication. This truly was the foundation of globalization. And for a quirky tidbit, while the cable's primary purpose was serious business and international affairs, it also had its moments of domestic charm. One of the very first messages sent over the 1866 cable was not a stock quote or a diplomatic dispatch, but a simple request from a British journalist to his wife in America, asking for her dress measurements. Because even when you're connecting continents, sometimes you just need to make sure your significant other's new outfit will fit. Clearly, the priorities of international communication were established early on. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing even after 1866. There were still technical challenges, maintenance nightmares, and the occasional grumpy shark trying to chew on the cable. Yes, that was a real problem sometimes, though less common than ship damage or natural wear. Historians still argue whether the initial economic impact was as immediate and widespread as the technological leap itself, or if it took several years for businesses to fully adapt to the new speed of information and truly leverage its potential. But regardless of the exact timeline, the direction was set. Think about it, the very concept of real-time, global events, of knowing what's happening on the other side of the planet almost instantaneously, began with that cable. Before it, news was history by the time it arrived. After it, news was current events. It sparked the imagination, proving that distance was no longer an insurmountable barrier to communication. It paved the way for the telephone, then radio, then television, and ultimately, the internet. Every time you send an email, stream a video, or video call someone across an ocean, you are, in a very real sense, standing on the shoulders of those men who wrestled a serpent of wire across the Atlantic, battling storms and breakages, driven by a dream that seemed utterly impossible. Their lonely vigil, their back-breaking labor, their crushing disappointments and ultimate triumph didn't just lay a cable, they laid the groundwork for the very fabric of our interconnected lives. It was an epic, harrowing, and ultimately glorious chapter in human ingenuity and perseverance. And now, as the story of the transatlantic cable winds down, you can feel that connection, too, stretching across time and space, bringing you closer to the quiet, dark depths where that first silent lifeline still rests. The ships are gone now, their holds empty of the colossal coils. The roar of the engines, the creak of the deck, the shouts of the crew, all have faded into the whispers of history. But the legacy of their monumental effort, that colossal undertaking, continues to hum beneath the waves, a silent testament to human will and the unyielding desire to bridge the distances that separate us. You have journeyed through storms and triumphs, through the depths of the ocean and the heights of human ambition. Now, as the final echoes of the telegraph's triumphant hum soften, and the image of that slender thread connecting worlds begins to gently recede, allow yourself to simply rest. The great work is done. The world is connected. And you, too, can now drift into the quiet, peaceful currents of sleep, knowing that even in the deepest silence, there is always a connection waiting to be made. Close your eyes. Breathe softly. Let the gentle darkness embrace you.